Clara Whitaker pressed both hands flat against the cold train window and told herself she would not cry. She had already cried everything she had. There was nothing left. The town appearing through that glass was not salvation. She knew that. It was survival and survival. She had learned, looked nothing like hope. She picked up her 2 worn bags, straightened her spine, and stepped off onto the platform of Red Willow Creek, Montana, with 31 years of living behind her and nothing certain ahead. If you've ever had to start over when you had nothing left, to start with, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, hit that bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to know how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The advertisement had been 11 words. Clara had read it so many times the paper had started to soften at the folds. Widower seeking a capable woman, must know household work and cooking. A good heart is valued above all else, 11 words. No promises, no poetry, no mention of love or companionship or anything that would have made a sensible woman answer with hope instead of calculation. Just a man stating plainly what he needed, the way a man might post a notice about needing a new fence post or a reliable plow horse. Clara had read it in the back of a church bulletin, sitting on a cot in her sister-in-law's spare room in Billings, listening to the thin walls and the even thinner patience of a woman who had her own children to feed and her own hardships to count. You can stay through the winter, her sister-in-law, Dora, had said in October. But come spring, Hank says we need the room. It was February when Clara answered the advertisement. She told herself it was practical. A widower with 7 children needed someone capable and willing to work hard. She was both those things. She had managed a farm, stretched flour and salt pork through lean months, kept a household moving through grief and drought and the particular silence that falls over a home when a marriage has gone cold. She knew how to work. What she did not write in her letter, what she could not write, because it would have sounded like begging, and Clara Whitaker had not yet learned how to beg was the rest of the truth. That her husband Robert had died 18 months ago. That the farm they had built together had failed before the ground was fully frozen over his grave. That she had no children of her own, no property, no family nearby who could take her in without cost. That she was answering an advertisement from a stranger in a town she had never heard of because it was the only door left that appeared to be open. She received his reply 3 weeks later, Mrs. Whitaker. Your letter was well written, and your experience is sufficient. If you are willing, you may arrive by the 3rd week of June. Holloway Ranch is 4 miles east of Red Willow Creek. Someone will meet you at the station, N. Holloway. Sufficient. She had folded that letter carefully and placed it beside the first one, and told herself that sufficient was enough. That it was more than she had. She packed 2 bags, one for clothing, one for the few things she could not leave behind, her mother's recipe notebook, a small framed photograph of Robert taken 6 months before he died. 3 seed packets she had saved from her kitchen garden, because she could not bear to leave them in the ground for strangers to neglect. Dora had hugged her at the station with real warmth and genuine relief in equal measure. You'll write, Dora said. I'll write, Clarissa said. She stepped onto the train and did not look back. She had learned by then that looking back only made the distance harder. The train ride from Billings to Red Willow Creek took most of a day, crawling through country that opened and flattened until the sky became the largest thing in the world, and everything else towns, trees. Her own small life looked temporary beneath it. She watched it all through the window with the quiet attention of a woman who had learned to study things carefully before she trusted them. She was 31 years old. She had been married for 7 years. She had buried her husband alone because there was no one else available to stand beside her. She had held his hand through 2 weeks of fever, and then she had let the neighbor women come in and prepare him while she sat outside in the cold because the house had become something she could not breathe inside of. She was not fragile. She wanted to make sure of that before the train arrived. She repeated it to herself the way she had repeated recipes in her mother's kitchen when she was a girl, quietly, steadily, until it became something reliable. She was not fragile. She had simply used up everything she had. The man waiting at the station was not Nathaniel Holloway. He was a boy or close enough to one, perhaps 16 or 17, tall and broad through the shoulders in the way boys get just before they finish becoming men. He had dark hair pushed back from his forehead and his father's eyes, which Clara did not know yet, but would come to recognize later as something the Holloway children all carried, a particular kind of watchfulness. As though they had learned early that the world required paying attention to. He held a piece of paper with her name written on it in large, careful letters. Clara Whitaker. The letters were slightly uneven, like someone had been trying very hard to write neatly and had not quite succeeded. She walked toward him, and he straightened up fast, the way young men do when they're not sure whether to tip their hat or offer their hand, or simply stand still and hope for the best. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. "That's right," she said. "And you are?" "James Holloway, ma'am. I'm the oldest." "Pa sent me because he couldn't leave the cattle," he said matter-of-factly, without apology, and she appreciated that. There was no performance in it, just information. "Of course," she said. "Thank you for coming." He reached for her bags without asking, which she also appreciated, and carried them to a wagon hitched to a patient-looking roan mare at the edge of the platform. He helped her up with a formality that suggested someone had recently instructed him on manners, and then he climbed up beside her and clicked the mare forward without ceremony. They rode in silence for a while. The town passed behind them. She caught glimpses of a general store, a church with white paint peeling at the corners, a saloon that looked like it had been the first building built and hadn't been touched since. Then the town ended and the country opened up again, all grass and summer heat, and the sound of the mare's hooves on the packed earth road. "How many brothers and sisters did you say you had?" Clara asked eventually, because she felt the silence becoming the kind that required filling. "6, James 17. Then there's Mabel, she's 16. Then Ethan, he's 14. Thomas is 12. Daniel is 10. Luke is 8. And Samuel is 6. He recited them the way someone recites a list they've had memorized for years, not thinking about it, just moving through them in order. "That's quite a family," Clara said. "Yes, ma'am." Another silence. "Your father," she said carefully. "What should I know about him?" James was quiet for a moment longer than the question required. He kept his eyes on the road. "He's a fair man," he said finally. "He doesn't say much, he works hard. He expects the same from everybody else." A pause. "He hasn't been easy since Ma died, but he's fair." "How long ago did your mother pass?" 3 years, James said. "February of 81. He said it without flinching, but she noticed his hands tighten slightly on the reins. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And then, after a moment, "Mabel's been running the house." "She won't, might be," he stopped, started again. "Mabel's been running the house a long time. She might take some getting used to." Clara understood what he was not saying. "I'm not here to push anyone aside," she said quietly. "I'm here to help, that's all." James looked at her then, a quick sideways look, the kind that is assessing and uncertain at the same time. "Yes, ma'am," he said again, but something in his voice had shifted just slightly. The ranch appeared in the distance. As the road curved, she saw the barn first, tall and weathered gray, and then the house behind it, 2 stories, wide porch running across the front. The kind of house that had been built to last, and had been doing exactly that for some years without any particular assistance from paint or repairs. It was not beautiful, but it was solid. She appreciated solid. As the wagon pulled into the yard, she became aware of being watched. They appeared one at a time. A boy of about 10 materialized beside the barn door, then another slightly younger one beside the fence post. Then a small dark-haired child of perhaps 6 came running from somewhere around the side of the house and stopped abruptly 20 feet away, staring at her with enormous brown eyes, and his hands clasped behind his back like he was trying to look very serious about the whole thing. That was Samuel. She didn't know his name yet, but she would think later, remembering this first moment, that she had felt something the instant she saw him. Something she couldn't name then and wouldn't try to name later. Just a recognition, the way you sometimes know a piece of music before it finishes its first measure. James helped her down from the wagon, The boy with the enormous brown eyes took one very careful step forward. "Are you the lady who's going to be our ma?" he asked. The yard went very quiet. Clara crouched down so she was level with him, which put her dress in the dust, and she didn't think about that at all. "My name is Clara," she said. "What's yours?" He studied her for a moment with the grave seriousness of very small children. "Samuel," he said. "Samuel James Holloway. I have 3 names because Pa said I needed room to grow into them." "That's a fine set of names," she said. "It's very nice to meet you, Samuel James Holloway." Something shifted in his face, a loosening, a decision being made. "You can call me Sam," he said, as though granting her a significant privilege. "Most people do." "Thank you, Sam," she said. "I will." She straightened up and found herself looking at a girl standing in the doorway of the house. Mabel Holloway was 16 years old, and she looked, Clara thought, like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had become so accustomed to the weight that she'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down. She stood straight, her dark hair pinned back neatly, an apron over her dress, her hands still at her sides. She had her brother's watchfulness in her eyes, but something else layered beneath it, a guardedness that went deeper than caution. She looked at Clara the way a person looks at something they've decided in advance they don't want. Clara met her gaze directly and nodded once. Mabel did not nod back. "Supper's at 6, she said, and went back inside. James cleared his throat quietly beside her. "I'll take your bags up," he said. "Thank you," Clara said. She stood in the yard for a moment longer, letting the ranch settle around her. The younger boys had retreated back to wherever they'd come from. Sam was still standing nearby, watching her with those large brown eyes, not quite willing to leave, but not quite ready to approach again either. "Is there somewhere I can wash my hands?" she asked him. His face lit up with the particular delight of a child who has been given an important assignment. "I'll show you," he said, and walked ahead of her toward the house with great authority. She followed him. She met Nathaniel Holloway an hour later. He came in from the fields at 5 o'clock, which she knew because she had been watching the clock in the kitchen, a large plain-faced clock that ticked with the steadiness of something that had never once considered stopping and cataloging. Everything she could see without appearing to pry. The kitchen was clean but spare. The pantry was organized but low. There were 7 different sizes of boots lined up inside the back door, and an array of hats on hooks above them and a dent in the wall beside the door frame at about the height a fist might make if someone had been very angry and then thought better of it. She heard him at the door, the particular sound of a man who is large moving with deliberate quietness, which is a thing that large men sometimes learn when they have learned that their size frightens people, and then he was in the kitchen. He was 42 years old, built like someone who had spent 20 years working land that fought back. With dark hair that was going gray at the temples, and a face that was weathered and square-jawed, and currently set in an expression she could not quite read because it was too carefully neutral. He had removed his hat at the door, which she registered. His hands were large and work-ruthened, and he held his hat in both of them. He looked at her the way you look at something you have agreed to in a letter and are now encountering in actual fact. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. "Mr. Holloway," she said. "James said you arrived without trouble." "I did, thank you." He nodded. His eyes moved around the kitchen, not checking on her, she realized, but checking on the kitchen itself, the way a man automatically inventories what needs to be done when he enters a space. "Supper at 6, he said. "Mabel mentioned," Clara said. "Is there anything I can help with this evening?" "Mabel has supper handled," he said. It was not unkind. It was simply information. "Tomorrow you can take a look at what needs doing. Tonight, rest." "I'm not tired," she said. He looked at her, then actually looked at her, not through her, and she had the brief sense that she had surprised him, though nothing in his expression changed. "Rest anyway," he said. 6 children will be up before dawn and they'll have something to say about it." 7, she said. "You said 6, she said. "James told me there are 7. A pause. Something moved behind his eyes, something brief and painful that he closed down almost immediately. 7, he said. "Yes, he left the kitchen. She stood for a moment looking at the doorway he had gone through. He hadn't corrected himself. She filed that away carefully, the way she filed everything away carefully, because she had learned that the things people don't say are usually more important than the things they do. Supper that evening was the education she had expected it to be. Mabel had made a beef stew competent, properly seasoned, served without warmth. She moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times and intended to continue doing it exactly the same way. She set 7 places, and then after a pause, set an 8th for Clara without looking at her. The children came to the table in rough order of age. James sat at the far end, nearest to his father. Ethan, 14, dark-eyed, quiet to a degree that Clara registered as something to pay attention to, sat beside him. Thomas and Daniel came in arguing about something involving a fence post and a dare, and settled only when their father looked up from his chair. Luke climbed in sideways and knocked his spoon off the table and retrieved it without apparent embarrassment. Sam came last and sat directly across from Clara and folded his hands and looked at her. "Are you going to say grace?" he asked her. "Sam," Nate said quietly. "I'm just asking," Sam said, perfectly reasonably. "Mabel says grace," Ethan said, not looking up. "Mabel always says grace," Sam said. "But maybe the new lady wants to." Mabel set a bowl of stew down in front of Sam with more precision than the action required. "I'll say it," Mabel said. They bowed their heads. Mabel said grace a short, practiced prayer, entirely without flourish, entirely correct, and then they ate. The conversation, what there was of it, moved around practical things. Thomas had fixed the gate. The eastern pasture needed looking at. One of the younger horses had a shoe coming loose. Nate asked questions and received answers and offered decisions, and that was, Clara understood, how it had worked for 3 years. This family moving together through necessity, speaking the language of work and immediate need. Everything else packed away somewhere beneath the surface where it would not slow anyone down. She watched Sam try to eat around his carrots, pushing them methodically to one side of his bowl. "Don't like carrots," she said quietly, not drawing anyone else's attention. He looked at her with the slightly guilty expression of someone caught doing something they weren't sure was wrong. "They're fine," he said with the transparent dishonesty of a 6-year-old. "Do you like them better with honey?" she said. "Cooked soft with a little honey in the pot." He stared at her. "How do you know about that?" he said. "My mother used to make them that way," she said. "I'll try it sometime." He looked at her for a long moment with those enormous brown eyes, and then he picked up a carrot and ate it with visible effort and the expression of someone doing a great personal favor. She almost smiled. After supper, after the children had been sent to wash and the kitchen was being cleared, Clara found Mabel alone at the sink and came to stand beside her. "Can I help?" she asked. "I have it," Mabel said. "I can see that," Clara said. "I'm asking anyway." Mabel handed her a dish without looking at her. They washed in silence for a few minutes. "You don't have to be careful with me," Mabel said finally. "I'm not being careful," Clara said. "I'm being polite." A pause. "People come here and they're careful," Mabel said. Her voice was flat and precise and gave nothing away. "They talk slow and they smile, and they try to make friends with Sam. Because Sam's easy to make friends with, and then they decide it's too much, and they leave." "Who's come here before?" Clara asked. "Mrs. Delacroix from town brought supper after Ma died and spent 3 hours telling Pa she'd be glad to help. She came back twice, and then she didn't." Mabel handed her another dish. "Pa's sister came the first summer and stayed 6 weeks, and cried every morning and went home to Denver. A woman from the church answered the first advertisement Pa put out. She lasted 9 days. 9 days, Clara said. She said the boys were too loud," Mabel said, with a flatness that was not quite contempt but was adjacent to it. "That's fair," Clara said. "They are quite loud." Something shifted in Mabel's face just briefly, barely, and then it was gone. "I'm not leaving," Clara said, quietly and without particular emphasis, the same way she might say the water's getting cold, or we're almost out of soap. "Just a fact." Mabel handed the last dish. "You've been here 6 hours," she said. "Yes," Clara said, "and I'm still here." She set the dish on the shelf and hung the drying cloth, and said good night and went upstairs to the small room that would be hers. Plain walls, a narrow bed, a single window looking out toward the barn, and she sat on the edge of the bed and did not cry. She had told herself she would not. She unpacked her mother's recipe notebook and her photograph of Robert and her 3 seed packets and placed them on the small shelf beside the bed. She looked at Robert's photograph for a long moment. "I'm all right," she told him, which was not the same as being fine. But she had learned to tell the difference. The next 2 weeks were the most demanding of her life. And that was saying something considerable, given that her life had included a 7-year marriage to a man who had farmed difficult land through difficult weather until the difficult land and difficult weather had finally finished him. The Holloway household ran on a system that was entirely Mabel's, built by necessity, refined by 3 years of repetition, organized around the assumption that no one else would do it correctly, because no one else ever had. Mabel did not say any of this directly. She did not need to. It was present in the way she moved through the kitchen, in the route she took between the pantry and the stove, in the small territorial precision with which she arranged things on the shelves. Clara did not challenge any of it. She watched. She helped where she was permitted. She stayed out of the way where she was not. She learned the children. Thomas, who was 12, and Daniel, who was 10, were the ones most likely to test something: a fence, a rule, a new person, and the most likely to be completely open about it. They challenged her directly, in the cheerful, open way of boys who have learned that the worst thing that usually happens is they get sent outside. "Can you ride?" Thomas asked her on the 3rd day. "Passably," she said. "Pa says only passably ain't good enough for this country," Daniel said, clearly repeating something he'd heard often. "He's probably right," Clara said. "I'll have to improve." They looked at each other with the particular look of children recalibrating. Luke, who was 8, was the one she had to watch most carefully, for the simple reason that he was always doing something, always moving, always taking things apart or putting them together in the wrong order, always arriving in the kitchen with mud or grease or something unidentified on his hands, with an expression of pure innocence. He was not a bad child. He was a child with more energy than the day could hold, and 3 years without someone directing that energy had let it develop its own geography. She discovered he loved machinery specifically, anything with gears or levers or mechanisms. She mentioned to Nate, carefully and without emphasis, that there was a book at the general store in town she had noticed that might interest one of the boys. "Which one?" Nate asked. "Luke," she said. Nate looked at her for a moment. "What kind of book?" he said. "Engineering principles. Simple mechanics. The kind of thing that gives a boy somewhere to put the energy." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll think about it," he said. 3 days later, the book appeared on the kitchen table with Luke's name written on the front page in Nate's careful handwriting. Luke spent the rest of the week reading it at the table and asking questions about pulleys that Clara answered as best she could and referred to James for the rest. Ethan was the one she thought about most. He was 14, and he was quiet in a way that was different from his father's quiet. Nate was quiet because he had decided that most things didn't require words. Ethan was quiet in the way of someone who has decided that his words have weight he can't always control, and so he keeps them mostly inside. He ate, he worked, he came to meals and completed his chores and was by all external measures a perfectly functioning boy. But he didn't draw, which she knew, because she had found a sketchbook tucked under his mattress when she was changing his bedding. She placed it exactly as Punch found it without mentioning it, and the drawings inside were detailed and careful, and suggested a boy who had once loved making things visible and had stopped. She found out why eventually. She was in the kitchen when she heard Mabel and Ethan talking in the hallway, not arguing, just talking. And she moved quietly so she wouldn't interrupt before she realized she was already hearing it. "It's not your fault," Mabel was saying. "I was supposed to ride for Doc Willis," Ethan said. His voice was low and careful. "I knew Ma was sick. I knew it was bad. And I didn't go because I thought she just needed to sleep." "Ethan, I should have gone," he said. "I was the one who was old enough. James was with Pa at the South pasture. I was there." I was there and I didn't go. A silence. She wasn't going to make it even if you had, Mabel said quietly. Dr. Willis told Pa that. He told Pa, Ethan said. After. Clara stood very still in the kitchen and did not move and did not breathe and did not let anything rattle against anything else on the shelf. That night, she made a point of finding Ethan in the barn while he was cleaning tack work he did alone, which she understood now was probably by design, and she sat down on a hay bale nearby and said nothing for a while, just being present without demanding anything from it. After a while he said, "You need something?" "No," she said. "I'm just resting." He looked at her sideways. "The house is more comfortable," he said. "I know," she said. "I like it out here though, quiet." He went back to the tack. After a few more minutes he said, "You heard us." "Me and Mabel." She didn't insult him by pretending otherwise. "Yes," she said. He was quiet. "You don't have to say anything about it," he said. It wasn't angry, it was just already decided. "I know," she said. "I won't." A long pause. "My husband," she said eventually, without looking at him, talking more or less to the middle distance. "He was sick for 2 weeks before he died. I sat with him every night. I knew every remedy I knew. I'd sent for the doctor. I'd done everything anyone could do." She paused. "He still died. And for a long time I kept going back over it. What if I'd sent for the doctor sooner? What if I'd made him rest earlier? What if I'd caught it a week before?" She paused again. "It took me a long time to understand that there's a difference between what you did and what happened. You can do everything right and still lose people. And you can go over it forever, and it doesn't change the ending." Ethan said nothing. She stood up and brushed hay off her skirt. "That drawing book under your mattress," she said, and she heard him go very still. "I wasn't looking for it. I saw it when I changed the bedding. I'm sorry for the intrusion." She moved toward the barn door. "I think you should take it out and use it, but that's your business." She went back inside. 3 days later she found a sketch on the kitchen table, a drawing of Sam, done in pencil, careful and detailed and alive, with the particular quality of someone drawing someone they love. It was propped against the salt cellar, where she would find it, and no one had signed it. She put it on the shelf beside the clock, without saying anything. She caught Ethan looking at it at supper that evening, and she did not acknowledge it, and he did not acknowledge it, and that was, she felt, the correct way to handle it. It was during the second week that she understood what the kitchen truly was to this family. She had seen it already in pieces the way Sam appeared there before anyone else in the morning, as though proximity to the stove was proximity to warmth in some larger sense. The way Thomas and Daniel turned up ostensibly for water, but stayed usually for the noise and movement. The way even James 17, and doing his best to be self-sufficient and grown, had a habit of coming through just before supper and finding small excuses to linger. But she understood it most clearly one morning when Nate came in before the children were up earlier than usual, the light still gray outside, and stopped when he saw her already at the stove. She was making biscuits. Nothing complicated. The kind of thing her mother had made every morning of her life with the same unhurried attention she brought to everything. Nate stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the stove and did not move. "I can come back," she said. "No," he said. He came in and sat at the table, not his usual chair, which was at the head, but the one to the side, closer to the stove. He sat and folded his hands on the table and said nothing. She went back to the biscuits. The kitchen was very quiet, just the stove and the sound of the dough and the gray light coming in through the window. After a long time, Nate said Eleanor used to make biscuits on Fridays. Clara kept her hands moving. "Eleanor was your wife," she said carefully. "Yes," he said. A pause. "The kitchen smelled like this on Friday mornings," he said. His voice was entirely flat. He was not asking for anything. He was just saying it, placing it somewhere outside himself for a moment. "I make them most mornings," she said.
"I can do a different day."
"No," he said. "Don't change anything." She finished the biscuits and put them in the oven and turned around to find him looking at his hands. "She'd been sick for a month before I understood it was serious," he said. "I thought it was a winter cold. She kept telling me she was fine." A pause. She didn't want me to worry. She was like that. Protecting everyone, even when she needed protecting herself. Clara sat down across from him, which felt bold but felt right. What was she like? She asked. He looked up. You want to know? He said. There was something in his voice that she thought might be surprise. Yes, she said simply. He was quiet for a moment. Then slowly, like someone pulling something out of a place it had been put away for a long time, he began to talk. She listened. She learned that Eleanor Holloway had been small and quick, and had laughed at things that surprised people, because they were not what you'd expect her to find funny. She had been a better rider than Nate, and had never let him forget it. She had liked thunderstorms and hated spiders, and had named every one of their horses something literary, because she had read every book she could get her hands on, and saw no reason horses shouldn't benefit from her education. She had called Sam her little philosopher, because he asked questions before he could properly pronounce the words for the things he was asking about. She had worried about Ethan, specifically had told Nate once that Ethan felt things more deeply than any of the others, and that someone needed to watch out for that. She had known she was dying before she told Nate. He stopped there. She didn't tell me, he said, until she couldn't hide it anymore. And by then. You were angry, Clara said. He looked at her. Yes, he said. You're still angry, she said. A very long silence. Yes, he said. His voice was absolutely even. That's all right, she said. He looked at her as though she had said something unexpected. It's all right to be angry, she said. People say it isn't, but it is. She should have told you sooner. You deserve to know sooner. That's a real thing to be angry about. Something passed across his face, brief, tightly controlled, but there. The children don't know that part, he said. I understand, she said. I'd appreciate I understand, she said again, firmly enough that he could hear she meant it. The biscuits were ready. She got up and took them out and put them on the counter, and he stood and put his hat back on. Thank you, he said. It was slightly unclear what he was thanking her for. Of course, she said. He went back outside. She stood in the kitchen alone for a moment. She thought about Robert, about the year after his death, when she had been so angry she had not known what to do with herself. Angry at the land for being too hard, and the winter for being too long, and Robert for leaving her, which was irrational and real in equal measure. She had not had anyone to say that to. She had gone to church and smiled and said she was managing and gone home and sat with it alone. She thought about the look on Nate Holloway's face when she told him it was all right to be angry. Like someone who had been waiting 3 years for permission. She went and planted her herb garden that afternoon, the seeds she had carried from Billings, pushing them into the earth along the south side of the house where they'd get enough sun. Sam found her there and crouched down and asked 11 precise questions about what each plant was and why she was planting them, and whether he could help. She told him yes and gave him the job of patting the soil down over the seeds she placed, which he performed with complete seriousness and obvious pride. There, he said when the last seed was covered. He sat back on his heels. Now they'll grow. They will, she said. He looked up at her. Clara, he said. Yes, Sam, I'm glad you came, he said, with the absolute directness of 6-year-olds who have not yet learned to hedge their meaning. Even Mabel's not as mad as she was when you first got here. She's just medium mad now. Clara kept her face very careful. I appreciate you telling me that, she said. You're welcome, he said. He stood and brushed dirt off his knees with great dignity. I'm going to go check on the horses. He walked off toward the barn. She looked at the turned earth, where the seeds were the herbs she'd carried 300 miles in her bag, because she could not leave them behind, and thought that sometimes the things you carry just for yourself turn out to be the first things you give away. Mabel found her there 20 minutes later. Sam told me you let him help plant, she said. There was no accusation in it. Just information, he asked, Clara said. He worked hard. A pause. Mabel crouched beside her, not quite sitting, looking at the turned earth. Ma had a garden, she said, tomatoes and beans mostly. And some flowers that didn't do anything except be pretty. She was quiet a moment. I let it go after she died. I just let it go. It's hard to tend something when you're grieving, Clara said. I wasn't grieving, Mabel said sharply. And then, a beat later, more quietly, I didn't have time to grieve. There was too much to do. Clara looked at her. Mabel was 16 years old, and she had the eyes of someone much older, and the hands of someone who had been working hard for years. And she was sitting beside a patch of turned earth where someone else's seeds were planted, and she was telling the truth without meaning to. You did an extraordinary thing, Clara said quietly. Keeping this family together. You were 13 years old, and you did an extraordinary thing. Mabel said nothing. You're also 16 years old, Clara said. And you should be allowed to be. A very long silence. I don't know how to do that anymore, Mabel said. Her voice was entirely even. It was the evenness of someone who has said something they didn't plan to say and is holding very still so they don't say anything else. I know, Clara said. That's all right, there's time. They stayed beside the garden for a while longer without talking. It was not a resolution, but it was a beginning. And in the failing light of a Montana summer evening, with the smell of turned earth, and the distant sound of cattle, and the particular silence of a family learning, slowly and without quite meaning to, how to breathe together again. Clara Whitaker pressed her hand flat against the warm soil and understood that she had done the right thing getting on that train. Not because it was safe, not because she was certain, but because sometimes a door opens not toward comfort but toward purpose. And purpose, she had learned, was something worth crossing a great deal of difficult country for. The night before the fever came, everything was almost ordinary. That was the detail she would return to later, how ordinary it had all seemed. Supper was ready at 6. Sam ate his carrots without complaint because she had, 2 days prior, made good on her promise and cooked them with honey. And his expression when he tasted them had been one of such complete vindicated satisfaction that Thomas had immediately asked to try some too. Nate had looked at her from across the table, with an expression she couldn't quite read, but that contained, she thought, something in the neighborhood of quiet acknowledgement. After supper, Mabel had helped, without being asked for the 3rd time that week, which Clara had noted and not remarked upon. Ethan had left another sketch on the shelf, a drawing of the barn this time, early morning light, rendered in careful pencil lines. Nate had stopped at the kitchen door on his way to check the stock and said, "The garden's doing well," which was 4 words, and for him, she had come to understand, amounted to something rather close to poetry. She had said thank you, he had nodded and gone out into the dark. And she had stood in the clean kitchen in the quiet house and thought, this is what it feels like when things are starting to mend. She should have known, perhaps. She had lived enough life to understand that things start to mend right just before the next thing breaks. Sam woke her at 2 in the morning. She heard him before she was fully awake, a sound in the hallway, small and wrong, the kind of sound that gets you upright before you know why. She was at her door in seconds. He was standing in the hallway in his nightshirt, swaying slightly. His face flushed a color she felt hit her in the stomach before her mind had fully named what she was seeing. "Sam," she said. "I don't feel good," he said, and his voice had that particular texture, thick and slightly blurred, that comes with a fever climbing. She pressed her hand to his forehead. It was burning. The same kind of fever that took Eleanor was the thought that moved through her head, cold and immediate, and she put it away. She had work to do. She pressed her hand to his forehead and felt the heat radiating up through her palm, like the boy had swallowed a coal from the stove. "All right," she said, and her voice came out steady, because she made it steady, because that was the one thing she could control right now. "All right, Sam, come with me." She got him back to his bed and pulled the covers up and stood for exactly 3 seconds deciding. Then she went and knocked on Mabel's door. Mabel opened it almost immediately, which told Clara the girl had not been fully asleep, had perhaps never been the kind of sleeper who went all the way under, not in 3 years. Not when she was always listening for something to need her, in the night. "Sam's got a fever," Clara said. Mabel's face changed. Not dramatically, she was too controlled for that. But something went through her eyes that was quick and cold and afraid. How bad, she said. Bad enough that I need your help. I need you to tell me where your mother kept her medicine supplies. Anything she used for fever. Anything at all. Mabel was already moving. She went to a cabinet in the hallway that Clara had assumed was storage. It looked like storage, plain doored. Nothing to mark it as significant, and she opened it, and inside were the organized remnants of what had clearly once been Eleanor Holloway's domain. Cloth strips folded with care, 3 small brown bottles. A tin of dried herbs that Clara leaned forward to smell immediately. Yarrow and elderflower, she said, almost to herself. Ma used them for fever, Mabel said. She knew about plants. She knew about a lot of things. A pause. I never paid enough attention. You were 13, Clara said, already reaching for the tin. Go fill the biggest pot you have with cold water. And I need clean rags. As many as you can. Mabel went. Clara carried the tin to Sam's room and sat beside him on the bed. He was awake barely, his eyelids heavy and his breathing shallow. He looked smaller than he ever had. The flush in his cheeks was deep, and the heat coming off him had not lessened. You're going to stay with me, Sam, she said, and she meant it the way you mean something when you are not asking. My head hurts, he said. I know, she said. I'm going to fix that. Promise, he said. She pressed her hand to his cheek. Yes, she said. It was not a promise she had the right to make with absolute certainty, and she made it anyway. She heard the sound of heavy boots on the stairs a few minutes later, and knew before the door opened that it was Nate. Not James, whose step she already knew was quick and light. Not Ethan, who moved quietly. Nate had a particular way of moving through a house, deliberate, measured, that she had learned to recognize the way you learn to recognize weather coming. He stopped in the doorway. His eyes went to Sam first, the way a father's eyes always go to the child, and she saw the exact moment he registered what he was looking at. She had seen that expression before, not on Nate, but she recognized it, the expression of a man encountering something that has ambushed him from his own past. His face went still in a way that was entirely different from his usual stillness. This was not controlled quiet. This was the stillness of someone who has just stepped somewhere they recognize and cannot move. How long, he said. I don't know exactly, she said. He came to my door an hour ago. It may have started before that. This is how Eleanor, he said, and stopped. Nate, she said, and she used his name deliberately, because she needed him to hear her and not the ghost in the room. I need you to listen to me right now. He looked at her. This is not the same, she said. Sam is strong and we are here and we are not going to sit and wait. I need you to do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that? A pause. Yes, he said. Ride to town for doctor. Willis, she said. I don't care what time it is. Tell him it's a high fever in a child. He'll come. It'll take 2 hours, he said. Then you'd better go now, she said. He was already turning. She heard his boots on the stairs, heard the back door, heard the horse in the yard a few minutes later, the sound of hooves moving fast away from the house into the dark. She let out a breath she had not entirely been aware of holding. Mabel appeared in the doorway with a basin of cold water and a stack of cloths. Good, Clara said. Come here. I'll show you what to do. They worked side by side through the rest of that night, the way 2 people work when there is something that needs doing, and no energy to spare for anything that does not serve the task. Clara showed Mabel how to wring the cloth to the right dampness, not dripping, not too dry, and where to place it across Sam's forehead and the back of his neck and his wrists. She prepared the yarrow tea from her own knowledge and her mother's notebook, measuring carefully, talking through what she was doing and why, not because Mabel asked her to, but because she had found that speaking out loud made the hands steadier. How do you know all this? Mabel asked once, somewhere in the middle of the second hour, her voice low so as not to disturb Sam. My mother was a practical woman, Clara said. She believed the best thing you could do for someone sick was be useful and stay calm, and not treat them like they were already gone. Mabel looked at the cloth in her hands. When Ma was sick, she said, I didn't. I thought if I just kept everything running, if I kept the house clean and the meals on time and everything exactly right, she stopped. You thought if you kept everything in order, she'd get better, Clara said quietly. Yes, that's what you do when you love someone, and you can't fix the thing that's wrong with them, Clara said. You control what you can control. You kept this family alive, Mabel. That's what you did. You kept them alive. Mabel wrung out the cloth and placed it on Sam's forehead with great care. It wasn't enough, she said. It was enough, Clara said. Your mother died anyway. That's not the same thing as it not being enough. Sam stirred beneath their hands. Clara, he said. Right here, she said immediately. Are you still here? I'm still here, she said. Don't go, he said. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He settled, his breathing evened slightly. The heat had not broken yet, but it had not climbed further, which she took as the first small victory of the night. Mabel looked at her across the bed. He's never asked me that, she said. What? Don't go, Mabel said. Her voice was very quiet. He's never said that to me. He just assumes I'll be there. That's because you always have been, Clarissa said. Mabel said nothing for a moment. He likes you, she said. It was not an accusation. It had moved past that. It was something closer to an acknowledgement, the tone of someone setting something down they've been carrying, and were not sure they could release. I like him, Clara said. He likes everybody, Mabel said. Sam likes Sam has never met a person he didn't decide to love inside of 5 minutes. A pause, something that was almost but not quite a smile. Pa says he got it from Ma. She was like that too. Nate told me about her, Clara said carefully. A little. She sounds like someone remarkable. Mabel looked at her, then a long, direct look. He talked about her, she said. A little, Clara said again. He'd talk about her, Mabel said, not to us. Not ever. We don't say her name at supper or ask questions, because we figured out early that it makes him. She stopped. Started differently. He goes very quiet, quieter than usual. And then he works twice as hard the next 3 days, which means he's not sleeping, which means he's running on nothing, and we stopped. I think, Clara said slowly, that he's been trying to protect you from his grief. And you've been trying to protect him from yours. And nobody's been allowed to actually grieve. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. She used to sing in the kitchen, Mabel said, in the mornings. Not always real songs. Sometimes she just made them up. Nonsense things, she stopped. I can't remember the words anymore. I can remember her voice but not the words, and that I hate that I can't remember the words. Clara did not say that's all right or you'll remember them someday, because those things were not necessarily true, and Mabel deserved better than comfortable falsehoods. Tell me about her voice, Clara said, and Mabel did. She talked for the better part of an hour quietly, steadily, while they kept the cool cloth cycling on Sam's fever and the candle burned lower. She talked about Eleanor Holloway the way someone talks about a person they have been holding inside themselves, very carefully for a very long time. Clara listened the way her mother had taught her to listen, without filling in the spaces, without rushing toward the next part, just letting the story be the size it needed to be. Somewhere around 4 a.m, Sam's fever began to shift. It did not break cleanly the way fevers sometimes do in stories. It reduced by degrees, the heat under Clara's hand becoming slightly less fierce, Sam's restlessness settling, his breathing deepening. She kept the cloths changing. She got more yarrow tea into him, slowly spooning it past his lips when he was awake enough to swallow. Mabel fell asleep at some point in the chair she'd pulled beside the bed, her head tipping forward onto her hand. Clara watched her sleep for a moment, the hard line of her jaw softening, the tight set of her shoulders releasing, and thought that this was what Mabel looked like when nobody needed anything from her. Young, bone-tired young. Clara kept watching. Just before 5, James appeared in the doorway, already dressed. I heard Pa leave, he said quietly. I should have come sooner. You're here now, Clara said. He'll be back with the doctor within the hour. James looked at Sam, then at Mabel, asleep in the chair. She never sleeps, he said. She's exhausted, Clara said. She's been exhausted for 3 years, he said. Yes, Clara said. I know. He came in and sat on the floor beside the door, resting his back against the wall with the ease of someone who is used to being wherever he is needed and not requiring comfort to do it. Tell me something, Clara said, keeping her voice low. What? He said. Something good, she said, about this family. Something that has nothing to do with what's been hard. He thought about it. Pa, he said finally. Last spring we were fixing fence on the east side and I got it wrong. The posts, the angle, I'd miscalculated, and we had to pull up 2 days of work and do it over. I was ready for him to, I don't know. He's not a man who wastes words on losing his temper. But I thought he paused. He just said, every fence I ever built wrong taught me something the right ones didn't. And then we did it over. Clara listened. That's him, James said. He doesn't say much, but when he says something, it tends to be the thing you needed to hear even if it's not what you expected. He's like that, she agreed. You've noticed it, James said. I notice most things, she said, a pause. Mrs. Whitaker, he said. Clara. The correction was deliberate. Are you going to stay? She looked at Sam, still flushed, breathing easier now, one small hand curled on the blanket. Yes, she said, because of Sam, he said. Because of all of you, she said. Sam, Mabel, Ethan and his sketchbook, Thomas trying to test every boundary I have, Daniel trying to test them along with him, Luke and his gears and levers. She paused. Your father. James was quiet. You care about him, he said. It was not a question. I respect him, she said, carefully. That comes first, before anything else. Ma used to say that about him, James said. She said she fell in love with him because she respected him first. Because he was the kind of man who was the same in private as he was in public. She said that was rare. The candle had burned nearly to its stub. Clara kept her hand on Sam's wrist, feeling his pulse still fast but not alarming now, not climbing. She sounds like she was wise, Clara said. She was, James said simply. She was the best person I've ever known, and I know that's he stopped. I know that's a complicated thing to say to you. It's not complicated at all, Clara said. It's exactly what a son should feel about his mother. Nate came back with Dr. Willis at 6:20. She heard the horses before she heard the voices, and then Nate's boots on the stairs faster than his usual measured pace, which told her everything about the state he'd been in for the past 4 hours riding in the dark, and then he was in the doorway. His eyes went straight to Sam. The boy was sleeping. Actually sleeping now, not the restless, shallow dozing of a high fever. His color was still high, but the fire had gone out of it. Nate stood very still. Dr. Willis came past a small, gray-haired man with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been woken before dawn many times and had ekpet as part of the bargain and examined Sam without ceremony, while Clara told him what she'd done and when. He listened, nodded, pressed his fingers to Sam's pulse points, and lifted his eyelids and checked his throat and neck. Good management, he said. The Yarrow tea was right. Kept him from going higher. He looked at Clara over his spectacles. You know what you're doing. My mother taught me, she said. She taught you well. He turned to Nate, the fever's breaking. He needs rest and fluids and watching for another 24 hours. But he's going to be fine. Nate did not move for a moment. Then he sat down in the chair that Mabel had vacated. Mabel had woken when the doctor arrived and retreated to the hallway, standing just outside the door, and he put his face in his hands. It was the only time Clara had seen him come apart, even slightly. It was brief. 15 seconds, perhaps. His shoulders shook once, and then he pulled his hands down and breathed in and was controlled again. But she had seen it. He looked at her. You stayed, he said. Yes, she said, all night, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said. And this time the weight of what he was thanking her for was entirely clear. Dr. Willis packed his bag and said he'd check the following day and made his way out, declining breakfast with the good-natured efficiency of a man who had more calls to make. James walked him out. Clara could hear the younger boys beginning to stir in their rooms, the particular sounds of children waking and becoming immediately loud, and she knew the house was about to shift from the held-breath quiet of the night into the complicated noise of morning. She started to get up. Clara, Nate said. She stopped. He was still looking at her, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen there before. Not gratitude exactly. Not quite. Something more complicated. like a door that has been stuck a very long time beginning to move on its hinges. "I owe you more than a thank you," he said. "You don't owe me anything," she said. She stopped. Doing my job felt wrong, not because it wasn't true, but because it was also not all of the truth. "I was here," she said instead. "That's all. That's not nothing," he said. "No," she agreed, "it isn't." Mabel appeared in the doorway. "Breakfast," she said. Her voice was rough with exhaustion and something else. "I'll start it. Sit down," Clara said. Mabel blinked. "I'll start it," Clara said again, more gently. "You've been up all night." "Sit down." A standoff of several seconds. Then Mabel, and this was the thing Clara would think about later, would turn over and look at from different angles Mabel sat. In the doorway, back against the frame, sliding down to sit on the floor with her knees pulled up, and she tipped her head back and closed her eyes. She let someone else handle it. For the first time in 3 years, she let someone else handle it. Clara went downstairs and made breakfast. She made it the way her mother had made breakfast on hard mornings, the mornings after something difficult, when a family needed to be fed properly and reminded, through the act of a good meal, that they were still intact. She made eggs and salt pork and biscuits left over from yesterday, warmed in the pan, and she made a pot of oatmeal for Sam, because it was what sick children needed, and she made coffee strong enough to be useful. The children came down one by one, drawn by the smell and the way children always are. Thomas first, then Daniel, then Luke, who appeared already holding the engineering book and had to be told twice to put it down for breakfast. Ethan came last, saw the state of the kitchen, Clara at the stove, not Mabel, and paused. "Sam," he said. "Fever broke," Clara said. "He's sleeping." "He's going to be fine." Something in Ethan's face, that carefully controlled 14-year-old face, gave way very slightly. "Good," he said, and sat down. They were quiet at breakfast. Not the practiced quiet of people avoiding something, but the quiet of people who have been through a difficult night and are now sitting in the relief of its having passed. It was a different quality entirely. Nate came down and drank his coffee standing, the way he always did, but he didn't leave immediately. He stood at the counter and looked at his children around the table, and then he looked at Clara at the stove, and she's had her back to him. But she felt it, the way you feel someone's attention when it has real weight behind it. "We'll push back the east fence work today," he said to James. "Stay close to the house." James nodded without surprise. "Thomas, Daniel," Nate said. "Light work only. Ethan, I need you on the barn, but stay where I can see you." "Yes, Pa," Ethan said. "Luke," he said. "Yes, Pa." Inside today, Luke looked briefly devastated and then resigned. "Yes, Pa." Nate set his coffee cup down. "Clara," he said. She turned. "If you need anything," he said, "come find me." It was not a complicated sentence, but she understood what it meant coming from him, which was, "I trust you to tell me if something is wrong. I am not going to pretend last night didn't change something." "I will," she said. He went out. James caught her eye across the kitchen table and gave her the small, deliberate nod of someone who has been watching something carefully and reached a verdict. She turned back to the stove. Sam slept until noon. She went up to check on him twice before he woke, sat beside him for a few minutes each time, checked his temperature, adjusted his blankets. He was sleeping the deep, legitimate sleep of a body that has been fighting hard and is now recovering, and she did not wake him. When he did wake, his eyes opened and found her immediately. "You're still here," he said. "I told you I would be," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "My head doesn't hurt anymore," he said. "Good," she said. "Was it bad?" he asked. "You had a high fever," she said. "You were sick. You're better now." He thought about this with the seriousness he brought to most things. "Were you scared?" he asked. She considered the question honestly. "A little," she said. "But being a little scared just means you're paying attention." And I was paying very close attention. He seemed satisfied by this. "Clara," he said. "Yes, will you stay?" he said. "Not just today. He paused, working to get the words right. "Will you stay with us? For always?" The question landed in the quiet room with more weight than he knew he was giving it. She kept her voice steady. "That's a conversation for your father and me," she said carefully. "But I can tell you that I am not planning to go anywhere." But do you want to stay, he pressed. Not because you have to. Because you want to. She looked at him, 6 years old, with Eleanor's eyes, and an absolute refusal to accept an answer that wasn't the real one. Yes, she said, I want to stay. He smiled, then a slow, complete, satisfied smile. Good, he said, because I decided you're mine. She blinked. Yours, she said. Mine and everybody's, he said magnanimously. But I decided first, so mostly mine. He settled back against his pillow. Can I have something to eat? I'm very hungry. I'll see what I can do, she said. She went downstairs and stood in the kitchen, alone for a moment. I decided you're mine. She pressed her hand flat on the counter and took a breath. She had come here to survive, to be useful, to have a purpose and a place and enough to eat and work that meant something. She had not come here expecting anything beyond that. She had not let herself expect anything beyond that. But standing in the kitchen of Holloway Ranch, in the quiet afternoon, with the sound of the house settling around her and the smell of the herb garden coming through the window she'd cracked open, she understood that something had shifted. Not just in Sam, who had decided her fate in his own 6-year-old court without appeal. In the house itself. In the particular way Mabel said sit down and then, against every instinct she'd built in 3 years, sat. In Ethan's face when she'd told him Sam would be fine. In James's quiet nod across the breakfast table. In Nate standing at the counter not leaving, just staying for 5 minutes longer than he usually did. She made Sam a bowl of oatmeal with honey and brought it upstairs. She did not let herself think too far ahead. That was a lesson her life had taught her at considerable cost, that the future would arrive whether you worried about it or not, and the present was always asking for your full attention. The present was a sick boy who was now sitting up and demanding oatmeal. That was enough. 3 days later, when Sam was fully recovered and louder than anyone had a right to be after a serious illness, Ethan came into the kitchen while Clara was preparing supper. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Can I draw something in here, he said. I just need somewhere with light. She looked at him. His sketchbook was under his arm, slightly worn now from use. The table's free, she said. He sat at the table and opened his sketchbook and began to draw. He worked for 20 minutes, quiet, while she prepared the meal, and she did not comment on his presence and he did not comment on hers, and it was one of the most companionable silences she had experienced in months. When she put a glass of water near him, he did not look up. Thank you, he said. You're welcome, she said. He turned the sketchbook slightly. She glanced at it without meaning to, and then stopped. He was drawing the kitchen. Specifically, he was drawing her in the kitchen from the back, the way you see someone when they don't know they're being looked at. She was at the stove. The light was coming through the window. It was recognizable immediately, and rendered with the careful observation of someone who had been paying close attention for weeks. She did not say anything about it. He closed the book when he finished and stood. Supper smells good, he said. Thank you, she said. He left. She stood in the kitchen and she had just been given something that cost him considerably more than it appeared to, that a boy who had stopped making things visible had made her visible. Which meant he had decided she was worth the risk of looking at directly. She turned back to the stove. The meal was almost ready. She heard Nate at the back door, the familiar sound of his boots, and then he was in the kitchen, and he stopped when he smelled what was cooking. That's, he said, and then stopped. Rosemary chicken, she said. From my mother's recipe. A beet. Eleanor made something like that, he said. His voice was carefully neutral. On Sundays. I can make something else, she said. No, he said, don't. He went to wash his hands. She kept her back to him and kept her hands steady on what she was doing. She'd have liked you, he said from the other side of the kitchen, his voice quieter now, talking more to the basin than to her. Eleanor. She'd have liked the way she'd have liked you. Clara did not turn around. That means a great deal, she said. I figured it should, he said. He dried his hands and left the kitchen. And Claire Whitaker stood at the stove in the house that was learning to breathe again, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time, something she had stopped expecting to feel. which is perhaps why it arrived so quietly, without announcement. Not happiness exactly, something more durable than that. Belonging, just the first edge of it, just the beginning. But it was there, and it was real, and it was hers. The belonging she felt that evening in the kitchen did not announce itself as permanent. It arrived the way most real things arrive, quietly, without guarantees, asking nothing except that she not turn away from it. She did not turn away. The week after Sam's fever was different from every week before it. Not dramatically, not in any way that a stranger walking through the door would have immediately named. But the texture of the house had shifted the way the air shifts before a season changes, when nothing has visibly altered yet, but everything is preparing to. Sam followed her everywhere. Not clingingly, he was not a clinging child, but with the easy proprietorial comfort of someone who has decided a thing and sees no reason to revisit the decision. He appeared in the kitchen in the mornings before she had the stove going. He materialized at her elbow in the garden, with questions and opinions and observations that ranged from the deeply practical to the philosophically baffling. He introduced her to the horses by name and told her in detail which ones could be trusted and which ones were, in his estimation, showing off. "That's Chester," he said one afternoon, gesturing at a broad-chested gray gelding, watching them from the fence. "Chester's vain. Pa says I'm not supposed to say that about animals, but he is. He likes when you look at him." "And how do you know that?" Clara asked. "Because he stands different when he thinks nobody's watching," Sam said. "He droops. But when people come, he stands up real tall. He considered this." "That's vanity. That's very perceptive," Clara said. He accepted this as his due and moved on to the next horse. She found herself thinking that Eleanor had been right to call him her little philosopher. But it was not only Sam who had shifted. Mabel had stopped waiting to be asked before she helped. She had not stopped being watchful. That was too deep in her to change quickly. Perhaps too deep ever to entirely change, but the watchfulness had lost its defensive edge. She came to the kitchen now sometimes without a purpose, which was something she had not done in Clara's first weeks. She sat at the table and talked while Clara cooked, or she stood beside her, and they worked together in the particular comfortable silence of two people who have been through something difficult together and no longer need to explain themselves. It was Mabel who brought it up first. They were making pie late August, the kitchen warm, the windows open. Mabel was rolling pastry with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned the task young, and done it many times, and Clara was working the filling. And they had been talking about something inconsequential. The church social coming up the following week, whether Thomas and Daniel could be trusted to be helpless to loves at it, when Mabel stopped rolling and said, without particular preamble, "People in town are talking about you." Clara kept her hands moving in the bowl. "What are they saying?" she said. "Mrs. Harriet Coombs," Mabel said, told Mrs. Aldridge at the dry goods store that Pa brought a woman here who probably couldn't find a decent husband elsewhere and took the job out of desperation. She said it flatly. Reporting. Mrs. Aldridge told her that she'd heard you were a widow, and that widows who answered advertisements in newspapers were either very practical or very shameless, and she hadn't decided which. "I see," Clara said. Reverend Marsh told Pa on Sunday that he hoped the domestic arrangement at the ranch was being managed with his word was propriety. Mabel's voice didn't change. Pa told him the domestic arrangement at the ranch was none of his concern and walked away. Something warm moved through Clara's chest at that. "And what do you think?" Clara asked. Mabel was quiet for a moment, pressing the pastry into the pan with careful hands. "I think," she said slowly, "that you stayed up all night fighting for my brother's life. And I think Mrs. Harriet Coombs has never once done anything that cost her anything." She pressed the edge of the pastry down with her thumb, one deliberate movement. "So I know which one of you I respect more." Clara looked at her. Mabel did not look up. "Thank you," Clara said quietly. "I'm just being accurate," Mabel said, but her ears had gone slightly pink. The pie went into the oven. They did not speak of it again. But something had been said, and both of them knew it, and that was enough. It was 3 days before the church social that the first real trouble came. Not from within the house. from outside it. She was in the garden when she heard the wagon coming up the road, and she straightened and shaded her eyes and watched it pull into the yard. Two women she didn't know, dressed well for a ranch call, sitting up straight in the seat with the particular posture of people who have decided they are doing something charitable. The one holding the reins was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, with a face that had once been handsome and now settled into an expression of permanent assessment. Clara had seen that face in various towns and various form, the face of a woman who has decided that knowing everyone's business is a form of community service. "Mrs. Whitaker?" the woman said before Clara had reached the fence. "That's," Clara said. "I'm Edna Hargrove," the woman said. "My husband owns Hargrove Feed and Grain. We're on the church committee." She said it the way people say things they expect to confer authority. "This is Ruth Marsh, the Reverend's wife." "Good afternoon," Clara said to both of them. Ruth Marsh was smaller, quieter, with the look of someone who went along with things and had been doing it for so long she had stopped noticing. "We came to welcome you to Red Willow Creek," Edna Hargrove said, and the warmth in her voice had a practiced quality that Clara recognized immediately. It was the warmth of someone who has come to look at something, not welcome it. It must have been quite an adjustment, taking on 7 children. "It's been a good adjustment," Clara said. Of course. Edna looked at the house. Back at Clara, at the garden behind her. "We did wonder, well, the Reverend wondered, and naturally I agreed about the arrangement here." "You're not, that is. You and Mr. Holloway haven't." "We've corresponded by letter, and I've been employed as housekeeper and caretaker," Clara said, pleasantly and precisely. "Which I believe is what the advertisement stated." "Yes, but living in the home," Edna said, delicately. "With 7 children present," Clara said equally delicately. Ruth Marsh had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Edna pressed forward. "We only ask because we care about the family," she said. "The Holloways have been through a great deal. The children especially. And bringing a stranger in, under these circumstances, when Mr. Holloway has been well, he's been alone for some time." 3 years, Clara said. "Yes, and we worry." "You're very kind to worry," Clara said. "The children are well. The household is running. Sam recovered fully from his fever last week, which perhaps you heard about. I'll tell Mr. Holloway you stopped by." It was a dismissal delivered with complete courtesy, and Edna Hargrove recognized it as such, which Clara could see in the slight tightening of her mouth. "We'll see you at the social," Edna said. "I'm sure you will," Clara said. The wagon turned and went back down the road. Clara stood and watched it go, and kept her expression entirely neutral until it was out of sight, and then she turned back to her garden, and knelt down and pulled a weed with somewhat more force than the weed required. She was not angry about what had been said. She was angry about what had been implied, the particular kind of implication that sticks to a woman like mud, that she had been desperate, that her presence here was something to be watched for impropriety. That 3 years of a man raising 7 children alone was acceptable, but a woman coming to help was somehow suspect. She stayed in the garden until she had worked through it. Nate found her there an hour later. "James said 2 women from town came by," he said. "Edna Hargrove and Ruth Marsh," she said. "They came to welcome me." He was quiet for a moment. "Did they?" "They expressed concern about the propriety of the domestic arrangement," she said. She kept her voice even. "I told them the children were well, and the household was running, and sent them off." Another pause. "I'll speak to Hargrove," he said. "You don't need to," she said. "I know I don't need to," he said. "I'm going to." She looked up at him. His jaw was set in the particular way she had come to recognize as Nate, at his most decided, the look of a man who has made up his mind and is not planning to entertain counter-arguments. "It won't help," she said. "It might make it worse. Women like Edna Hargrove need something to say, and if you take one thing away, they find another." "What do you suggest?" he said. It was genuine. He was actually asking. "The social, on Saturday. Go, bring the children. Let people see what the household actually looks like." She paused. "That's the only argument that works. Evidence." He looked at her for a moment. "You're not wrong," he said. "I usually am it," she said. Something moved in his face. She would have called it amusement, if she hadn't known him well enough to know he rarely telegraphed it that clearly. But there was something there, brief and real. "You're also not from around here," he said. "So you don't know yet that Edna Hargrove has run this town's social opinion since her husband's father built the first grain store 20 years ago." "I grew up in a town with 3 Edna Hargroves," Clara said. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," he almost smiled. "Saturday then," he said. "Saturday," she agreed. The church social was held in the yard behind the church. Long tables set out, the smell of baked goods and roasted meat. The whole of Red Willow Creek assembled in its Sunday best and attempting to look casual about examining the Holloway family's new addition. Clara had dressed carefully not to impress, but to give no one anything to criticize. Her best dress clean and pressed, her hair pinned neatly. She helped Sam with his collar, which he objected to with great feeling, and she told him he could take it off the moment they left, and he accepted this compromise with dignity. They arrived as a family. All 9 of them, which was the most people the Holloway wagon had carried to a social event in 3 years, and Clara registered the moment they drew up to the church, because the conversations in the yard paused not dramatically, not all at once, but the particular pause of a crowd recalibrating. Nate helped her down from the wagon. He did it simply, without performance, offered his hand, which she took, and she stepped down. But it was the first time he had done it in public, and she was aware, without looking, that several people saw it. "You all right?" he said quietly. "Fine," she said. "Then let's go say hello to people," he said, and there was something in his voice that was both resignation and resolve, which she recognized as his version of courage. They moved through the social together. The children helped. Thomas and Daniel, who had apparently received some kind of instruction from James about behavior, were almost alarmingly well-mannered. Luke had left his engineering book at home and was attempting very hard to act like a normal boy at a church picnic, with partial success. Ethan was quiet but present. James moved with the easy social grace of someone who had grown up in this community and knew everyone and was known. And Sam was Sam. Within 15 minutes of arriving, he had attached himself to 3 elderly women Clara didn't know, accepted cookies from 2 of them, told the third that her hat was a very serious hat, with such earnest admiration that she laughed until her eyes watered, and generally conducted himself as an ambassador of goodwill that no amount of town gossip could withstand. Clara watched him from across the yard. "He does that everywhere," said a voice beside her. She turned. A woman about her own age, dark-haired, with an open face and laugh lines that suggested she used them frequently. "Martha Greer," the woman said. "My husband has the livery. We've been neighbors of the Holloways for 12 years. "Clara Whitaker," Clara said. "I know who you are," Martha said, and her tone was warm enough that it was not a pointed thing to say. "I also know about Sam's fever. Half the town does. News travels fast out here." She paused. "You stayed up all night." "The children needed tending," Clara said. "Edna Hargrove says." "I suspect I know what Mrs. Hargrove says," Clara said pleasantly. Martha looked at her for a moment, and then laughed a real laugh, quick and genuine. "Good," she said. "I was afraid you'd be fragile about it." She tilted her head. "You're not fragile, are you?" "Not particularly," Clara said. "Good," Martha said again. "Because this town is small and the winters are long, and you need friends who'll tell you the truth. I'd like to be that, if you're willing." Clara looked at her, this woman she had known for 4 minutes, offering something direct and uncomplicated. "I'd be glad of it," she said. Martha nodded briskly, as though a deal had been struck. "Then come meet Helen Pruitt," she said. "She's the school teacher, and she's been asking about Mabel since she heard the girl was bright. And ignore Edna Hargrove. She'll come around. They always do when they figure out you're staying." "I'm staying," Clara said. "I know," Martha said. "I can tell. The ones who aren't going to stay have a certain look. You don't have it." She glanced across the yard to where Nate was talking to a group of ranchers. "He knows it too, I think, even if he hasn't said it yet." Clara did not respond to that, but she looked across the yard at Nate, who was at that exact moment looking back at her briefly, across the distance, before he turned back to his conversation. It was a look she would have had no language for a month ago. She was beginning to find language for it now. The real blow came the following Monday. She was in the kitchen when Nate came in from town, and she knew from the way he came through the door faster than usual, his hat still on, which he always removed at the door, that something had happened. "Sit down," he said. "Tell me," she said. She didn't sit. He put a paper on the table. She looked at it. It was a letter, and she recognized the letterhead before she read the first line, Hargrove Feed and Grain, the name printed at the top in the self-important font of a business that took itself very seriously. She read it. It took 3 readings because the first 2 she kept stopping, and she needed to read it all the way through before she let herself respond. The letter was from Gerald Hargrove, Edna's husband, addressed to Nathaniel Holloway, and written with the particular tone of a man delivering bad news he is personally enjoying. It stated that the promissory note Nate held with Hargrove Feed and Grain, taken out 2 seasons ago, when a cattle illness had wiped out a quarter of the herd, and Nate had needed supplies on credit to keep the rest alive, was being called in. Full payment, within 30 days. The amount at the bottom of the letter was significant. Clara set the paper down. "He can do this," she said. "He can do this," Nate said. His voice was flat. The note gave him the right to call it at any point. "I signed it because I had no other option at the time, and because I trusted." He stopped. "I trusted his word that he wouldn't call it early, unless there was a genuine reason. And his genuine reason," Clara said carefully, "is us." A pause. "Edna Hargrove talked to him," Nate said. "She's been talking to him since you arrived. She has views about the arrangement here. And Gerald does whatever Edna tells him to do, which everyone knows and nobody says." Clara looked at the letter again. 30 days, she said. "Yes, what happens if you can't pay?" Nate's jaw was set hard. "He gets the east pasture," he said. "It's written into the note. If I default, I forfeit the east pasture as collateral." A pause. "That's 40 acres of the best grazing land on the property. Without it, the herd's capacity drops by 1/3. I'd spend 5 years recovering from it. If I could recover at all." Clara sat down now. She pulled the letter toward her and read it again slowly, the way her father had taught her to read legal documents, looking not at what was written but at what was implied, what was permitted, what the spaces between the words contained. "When did you take this note?" she said. "Spring of '82, he said. 14 months after Eleanor died," she said. "Yes. You were alone with 7 children and a sick herd, and you needed supplies," she said. "Yes, and Hargrove offered credit on favorable terms." At the time, Nate said, it seemed like a favor," she said. "That's how these things work. They seem like favors until they need to be something else." She traced the letterhead with one finger. "He's owned 40 acres of your best grazing land in potential for 2 years. He's just decided now to collect." Nate looked at her. "You understand this kind of thing," he said. It was not quite a question. "My husband's farm," she said. "We had a similar arrangement with a merchant in Billings. I read every word of it, and Robert thought I was being overcautious, and I thought I was being careful." She paused. "We were lucky. Ours never got called in, but I learned what to look for." "And what do you see here?" he said. She looked at the paper. "I see a man who wants something that isn't the money," she said. "The money's real, but it's not the point. The point is to make you vulnerable enough that you have to deal with him on his terms." "His terms being what?" Nate said. "I don't know yet," she said. "But they'll involve either the land or ore, demonstrating to the town that you'll bend when he pushes." She looked up. "Have you ever bent for Gerald Hargrove before?" "No," Nate said. "Then this is the first test of whether you will." She folded the letter carefully. "Who's the bank here? Who do you deal with?" "Henry Aldridge at First Territorial," he said. "Is he a fair man?" "Fair enough," he said. "I've had no trouble with him. Can you get an appointment this week?" "Clara, can you?" "Yes," he said. "Then make it," she said. "And I want to go with you." He looked at her. "It's my business," he said. Not harshly, but directly. "I know it is," she said equally directly. and I know you didn't ask for my help. But I managed Robert's farm accounts for 7 years, and I'm telling you I can see something in these numbers that might matter. You can tell me no. A very long silence. She did not fill it. She had learned, in the weeks since she arrived, that Nate Holloway needed silence, the way some people need argument to think in, to decide in, to find his own ground in before he moved. "All right," he said. "All right, you'll make the appointment. Or all right, I can come," she said. "Both," he said. She nodded. She started to hand the letter back to him and then stopped. "Nate," she said. He looked at her. "This isn't your fault," she said. "You were a man alone, trying to keep everything from failing. You made a reasonable decision in a difficult moment. That's not the same as making a bad one." His face did not change. But he looked at her for a moment longer than he needed to. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Let me look at the cattle ledgers first." He stared at her. "The cattle ledgers," she said again. "You want to look at my cattle ledgers?" "Yes," she said. "Tonight if possible." He left and came back 10 minutes later with a battered ledger book and put it on the table in front of her without comment, which she took as the highest form of trust he currently had available to offer. She spent 3 hours with those ledgers that evening. She sat at the kitchen table, after the children were in bed, the lamp burning, going through every column and figure with the focused attention of someone who loves numbers, the way other people love music, because they tell the truth when everything else is being careful about it. Nate sat across from her for the first hour, not doing anything in particular, just being there, until she said, "Go to sleep. I'll tell you what I find in the morning." "It's my ledger," he said. "And it'll still be yours in the morning," she said. "Go." He went. She found the first thing within another 20 minutes. It was not dramatic. It never was. In accounts, the dramatic moments in ledgers were usually quiet lines that said simple things, unremarkable numbers, that only became remarkable when you set them next to other numbers and asked why they didn't match. The cattle feed expenditure did not match the herd size. She went back 3 seasons, compared figures, made notes on the paper she kept beside her. Went back further. The discrepancy was consistent. Not enormous, not the kind of thing that shouted, that you'd see if you were tired or grieving or managing 7 children and a failing operation, but consistent. Month after month, the feed bills came in slightly higher than they should have for the herd numbers recorded. She sat back. Hargrove Feed and Grain. She looked at the letterhead on the letter, which she had kept beside her while she worked. She looked at the ledger entries. She reached for another piece of paper. She did not sleep that night. By 4 in the morning she had something, not proof, not the kind of thing you could take to a judge without more but a pattern. A clear, documented 3-season pattern of overcharging. Small amounts, consistent amounts, the kind of amounts that a grieving man managing too much alone would not notice, because alone he had not had someone sitting across the table asking, "Why doesn't this match?" She heard Nate at the back door just before 5. He stopped when he saw her still at the table. "You stayed up," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her face, then at the papers. "What did you find?" he said. She told him. He stood very still while she explained the discrepancies, the pattern, the seasons, the amounts. He did not interrupt. He looked at the numbers she had laid out, and she watched his face move through something, not shock, she thought, because part of him had perhaps known something was wrong without knowing what, but recognition. The particular recognition of someone seeing the shape of something they had felt without being able to name. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. "He's been stealing from me," Nate said. "Overcharging," she said carefully, "which amounts to the same thing, but one is a business dispute and one is a crime, and which road we take matters for what happens next." Nate's voice was extremely controlled. "For 3 years," he said. "Yes," she said. "While Eleanor was sick," he said. "And after she died, while I was stopped." "Yes," she said. She watched him stand with that, watched him hold it, the full weight of it, a man being told that the person who offered him a favor in his worst moment had been using that moment against him, quietly, steadily, for 3 years. "Aldridge," he said, "the bank. Can I take this to him?" "What you have here," she said. Plus whatever invoices you've kept. Do you have the original invoices? In a box in the study, he said. Then yes, she said. You can take it to Aldridge, and you can take it to a lawyer. And when Hargrove comes to collect on that note, you will have something to say about the nature of your business relationship with him that will change the conversation considerably. This is leverage, he said. Yes, she said. This is leverage against the note, he said. Yes, she said. He looked at her. You did this in one night, he said. I had his ledgers and his letter, and 3 hours, she said. And someone taught me a long time ago that numbers don't lie if you ask them the right questions. He reached out and put his hand over hers on the table. It was brief, just a moment. His large, work-roughened hand over hers, one squeeze, and then he took it back. I don't know what to say, he said. You don't have to say anything, she said. Go get the invoices, he went. She looked at her hand on the table. She had come here with 2 worn bags and a letter that said sufficient. She had not expected to find herself sitting in a kitchen at 5 in the morning, holding the arithmetic of a man's survival in her hands, feeling something so much bigger than sufficient that the word seemed like a different language. He came back with a box of invoices. They worked side by side until the children started waking up, and by the time Mabel came downstairs and stopped in the doorway to find both of them at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, they had something solid. More than solid, Mabel said. Nate looked at Clara. Clara looked at the papers. We found something, Nate said. That's going to change a few things. Mabel looked between them at the papers, at her father, at Clara, and her face went through a rapid series of calculations. Good change or bad change, she said. Good, Clara said. Eventually, but first, Mabel said. First, Nate said, I'm going to go see Henry Aldridge and a lawyer, and we're going to have a conversation with Gerald Hargrove that's long overdue. Mabel was quiet for a moment. Then she said to Clara, You found this. The numbers were there, Clara said. I just read them. Mabel looked at her father. She just read them, she said with a tone that was not quite irony and not quite admiration, and was entirely and completely Mabel. I know, Nate said. Are you going to do what she says? I'm going to do what she found, Nate said. Which is different. Is it? He almost smiled. Go wake your brothers, he said. Mabel went, but Clara caught the look on her face as she left, the quick, private look of a girl who had been holding a family together for 3 years and was now watching someone stand beside her father in a way that nobody had stood beside him in all that time. Not replacing anything, not claiming anything, just standing there. Present, useful, real. The morning came on around them, loud and ordinary and alive, and Clara Whitaker sat at the kitchen table of Holloway Ranch, surrounded by the arithmetic of a man's survival, and felt for the first time since she stepped off that train entirely, unequivocally certain that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The appointment with Henry Aldridge at First Territorial Bank was set for Wednesday morning. Nate said nothing about it to the children, beyond what he had told Mabel, that there was business in town that needed handling. He said nothing to Clara about it either, not because he was keeping her out of it, but because she had noticed, in the weeks she had known him, that Nate processed difficult things by going quiet around them first. He needed to walk around a problem in his own mind before he could talk about it with anyone else. She gave him the space. She spent Tuesday going through the invoices a second time with the original ledger as, cross-referencing everything she had found the night before, making sure the pattern was as solid as she believed it to be. It was. If anything, the second reading was more damning than the first. She found 2 additional seasons where the discrepancy was present that she had initially passed over as minor variation. When she added them in, the total overcharge across 3 years was not small. It was enough. She wrote it all out in a clean hand on fresh paper, column by column, date, invoice number against ledger entry, the way her father had taught her to present an account, when presenting it to someone who needed to understand it, quickly and completely. Her father had been a bookkeeper in Ohio, and he had told her once that a well-organized account was an argument that could not be interrupted. She believed him then. She believed him more now. She put the papers in order and set them on the kitchen table and went to start supper. And when Nate came in from the fields that evening and saw them there, he sat down without being asked and read through everything she had prepared. She kept her back to him and kept cooking. She heard him turn pages. She heard him stop at certain places and be still for a moment before continuing. When he finished, he said, "This is thorough. It's accurate," she said. "Same thing in this case," he said. He paused. "You put it in order for Aldridge?" "Yes, he'll understand it. Any man who runs a bank will understand it," she said. "Numbers are numbers." "Clara," he said. She turned. He was looking at the papers, not at her, but his hand was flat on the table beside them, and she recognized that gesture by now. It was what he did when he was working towards saying something that cost him something to say. "I don't know how to stop." "Tried again." 3 years I've been carrying this operation alone. Every decision, every problem, everything that went wrong. There was nobody to. He stopped again. "I forgot what it felt like to have someone in your corner." The kitchen was very quiet. "You have someone now," she said. He looked up at her then. She held his gaze and did not look away, and did not qualify it, and did not give him anything to retreat from. Just the plain fact of it, offered without condition. He nodded once. He gathered the papers carefully and went to the study. She turned back to the stove and found that her hands were completely steady, which seemed important to notice. Wednesday morning came cold and clear, the first real suggestion of autumn in the air, and Nate had the wagon ready before Clara had finished pinning her hair. She came outside and he helped her up without being asked, which he had done every time since the social, and which she had stopped remarking on inwardly because it had begun to feel simply like how things were. James had the ranch for the day. He'd received his instructions the night before, with the quiet competence of a 17-year-old who had been functioning as second in command for 3 years and took the responsibility seriously. "Keep Sam out of the barn," Nate told him. "He'll go in the barn," James said. "Keep him out of the loft," Nate amended. "I'll do my best," James said, which was honest. They rode to town mostly in silence, which was their natural shared language, by now a silence that had shifted from the careful quiet of two strangers, trying not to demand too much of each other into something easier. The kind of quiet that doesn't require explanation. Once, on the road, Nate said, "If Aldridge doesn't see it the way you do." "He'll see it. You're sure?" "I'm sure of the numbers," she said. "I'm sure of what they say. What Aldridge does with them is his decision." "But yes, I'm sure," he nodded and didn't raise it again. Henry Aldridge was a man of perhaps 60, gray-haired, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent decades reading people across a desk and had grown very accurate at it. He received them in his office with a courtesy that was genuine but reserved. He looked at Clara when Nate introduced her, a measuring look, and she met it directly, and he shifted his assessment slightly, and that was the end of that. Nate set the papers on his desk. "I'd like your opinion on something," he said. Aldridge looked at the papers. He reached for them with the automatic authority of a man in his own office, began reading, and within 30 seconds his expression had changed from polite attention to something more focused. Clara watched him read. He went through everything: the ledger comparisons, the invoice cross-references, her summary column, the total figure at the bottom. He went through it twice. He turned back to the beginning and looked at one particular section again. Then he set the papers down and looked at Nate. "How long have you had this?" he said. 2 days, Nate said. Aldridge looked at "Paired this," he said. "Yes," she said. "You're confident in the figures." "I checked them twice," she said. "The methodology is straightforward. Invoice number against ledger entry, date by date. There's no interpretation involved. Either the numbers match or they don't." "They don't," Aldridge said. "No," she agreed, "they don't." He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, in the way of a man who is reorganizing what he knows about a situation. "Hargrove called in a note," he said. "It was not a question." "Yes," Nate said, 30 days. "He has the right to do it," Aldridge said. "He does," Nate said. "But I'd argue the nature of our business relationship bears on what happens next." Aldridge looked at the papers again. 3 years, he said. Yes, consistent overcharging. Yes, a long pause. Nate, Aldridge said, and the formality dropped slightly. I'm going to speak plainly, Nate said. What you have here is not nothing. It's not proof of criminal fraud. Without more, you'd need a lawyer for that, and I'd recommend you get one regardless, but it is a documented pattern that any reasonable person looking at it would find significant. He paused. If Hargrove wants to press the note, you have grounds to counter with a claim of your own. Whether that results in the note being restructured or forgiven, I can't promise you. But it changes the conversation considerably. That's what she said, Nate said, with a sideways glance at Clara that she chose not to examine too closely. She's right, Aldridge said, and he said it with the directness of a man who gives credit where he finds it, without ceremony. He looked at Clara. You have a good head for accounts, Mrs. Whitaker. My father was a bookkeeper, she said. You should have been one, he said. The opportunity wasn't offered, she said pleasantly. He heard what she meant and nodded once, accepting it. I'll make some inquiries, he said, quietly. There's a lawyer in Billings who handles these matters with discretion. In the meantime, he looked at Nate. Don't respond to Hargrove's letter yet. Not until you've spoken to counsel. And the 30 days, Nate said. The clock is running, Aldridge said. But 30 days is enough time to make this very uncomfortable for Gerald Hargrove if your documentation holds up. Which, he added, looking again at Clara's careful columns, I believe it will. They left the bank. Standing outside on the boardwalk in the autumn sharp air, Nate put his hat back on and stood for a moment looking at nothing in particular. Well, he said. Well, she agreed. Aldridge doesn't give compliments. I noticed, she said. He gave you one. He gave the numbers one, she said. I just organized them. Nate looked at her sideways. You are the most stubborn woman, he said, about accepting credit for things you did. She blinked. He said it with such plain, quiet certainty, not frustrated, not teasing, just observing that she didn't have an immediate answer for it, which was unusual. I'm practical, she said finally. You're stubborn, he said. But you're also right most of the time, so I've decided it's acceptable. She stared at him. He was already walking toward the wagon. She followed, and she did not let him see that she was smiling, because she suspected he already knew. The letter from Gerald Hargrove arrived 4 days later. Not the formal one, a second letter shorter, written in a different hand from the first, less structured, with the agitation of a man who has learned something he wasn't expecting to learn. It said that the terms of the note were perhaps open to renegotiation, and that Mr. Hargrove would be glad to discuss the matter at a mutually convenient time, and that he hoped there were no hard feelings between them. Nate read it at the kitchen table. He passed it to Clara without comment. He knows, she said. Aldridge made his inquiries, Nate said. Quietly enough that Hargrove has now heard, she said. That's how quiet works in a small town, Nate said. A pause. He should be, she said. The lawyer in Billings wrote back yesterday, Nate said. He's willing to take the case. He says what we have is he stopped. Set his hands flat on the table. He says it's enough. If Hargrove presses the note, we can counterclaim. And if we counterclaim, Hargrove has a problem he doesn't want public. Clara looked at him. So what do you want to do, she said. I want the note forgiven, he said, in full, not restructured. Not extended. That's a significant demand. It's a significant fraud, he said. Yes, she said. It is. She thought for a moment. If Hargrove agrees to forgive the note in exchange for you not pursuing the overcharge claim, then he gets away with 3 years of stealing from me, Nate said. His voice was level, but she could hear the edge beneath it. Yes, she said, he does, and if I pursue the claim, then it's public, she said, all of it, which may be what he deserves and may also cost you time and legal fees and put you in front of a judge, which is always uncertain. She paused. What matters more to you, the money back or the accounting? He was quiet for a long time. The ranch, he said finally. What matters is the ranch and the children, If I get the note forgiven and the east pasture stays mine, I can rebuild what he took over time. A pause. I can't rebuild what I'd lose if I spent the next year in legal proceedings, and the operation falls apart while I'm in Billings meeting with lawyers. That's a reasonable position, she said. It doesn't feel like justice, he said. No, she said, it doesn't. But it's survival, and sometimes survival is what you choose because you have 7 children and 40 acres of good grazing land to protect. He looked at her. How do you do that, he said. Do what? Say the hard thing, he said. The thing I'm already thinking but haven't said yet. You say it. Like it's not simple, she said. It's just true, and true things are better said. Eleanor was like that, he said, and then he stopped the way he always stopped when Eleanor came into a sentence unexpectedly, as though he had not entirely planned for it. But this time he didn't pull back. She said what was true, he said. Even when it wasn't easy. She said it because she thought that was respect, telling someone the real thing instead of the comfortable one. He looked at his hands. I've missed that, more than almost anything. Having someone in the room who would tell me the real thing. Clara did not say anything. She understood that this was not a comparison. It was not him measuring her against Eleanor, or finding her either sufficient or insufficient. It was a man saying, this is what I lost and this is what I recognize, and I am not going to pretend I don't see it. I'll write to Hargrove, she said, the response letter. If you'd like. You? He knows the accounts came from me, she said. Aldridge's quiet inquiries would have made that clear. A response letter from me, precise, documented, without heat, tells him exactly what kind of mind he's dealing with. Which is sometimes more persuasive than the most passionate letter from the person who's angry. Nate considered this. You're not angry, he said. I'm furious, she said. That's exactly why I should write it. Something crossed his face, that almost expression she had come to read as his version of being moved. Write it, he said. She wrote it that evening. It was 4 paragraphs. Polite, precise, and completely without mercy. It outlined the documented discrepancy, referenced the relevant invoices and ledger entries, noted that counsel had reviewed the material and found it sufficient, and stated plainly that Mr. Holloway was prepared to pursue all available remedies unless the promissory note was forgiven in full within 14 days. Nate read it the next morning. He read it twice. You didn't threaten him, he said. I didn't need to, she said. The facts threaten him. I just introduced them. He folded the letter. I'll take it to town today, he said. She nodded and went to make breakfast. She was at the stove when she heard him stop at the kitchen doorway. Clara, he said. She turned. He was standing with the letter in his hand, and he was looking at her the way he sometimes looked at things he was trying to see clearly, directly, without flinching. With the full attention of a man who had learned that things looked at carefully were usually less frightening than things avoided. I want you to know, he said, that whatever happens with Hargrove, however this resolves, it has nothing to do with why you should stay. She held very still. You should stay because this is your home. Not because you saved the east pasture, because this is your home and we are. He stopped. Try it again, because the children need you. Because another stop. His jaw worked slightly, because I would very much like you to stay. For your own reasons, not because of any of this. The kitchen was completely quiet. Clara set down the spoon she was holding. Nate, she said, I was never going to leave because of Hargrove. I know, he said. I wanted to say it anyway. All right, she said. He nodded. He left for town. She stood in the kitchen alone for a long moment, her hand on the counter, the morning light coming through the window. The house beginning to stir around her, with the sounds of 7 children waking up, and the day starting, and everything ordinary, and everything changed. She had come here to survive. She was doing considerably more than that now. The letter worked. 14 days later, 13, actually a response arrived from Gerald Hargrove's lawyer, written in the careful language of a man communicating through legal representation because he no longer trusted himself to communicate directly. The promissory note was forgiven, in full. The collateral claim on the east pasture was released. There was no admission of wrongdoing, which was expected and accepted. And there was a concluding paragraph about mutual respect and good business relations that both Nate and Clara read with expressions that could generously be described as polite. Nate set the letter down. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's over." "Yes," she said. "The east pasture is still ours." Yes, he exhaled a long, slow exhale, the kind that carries something that has been held a very long time. "I want to tell the children," he said. "Tell them tonight," she said. At supper, he looked at her. "You did this," he said. "We did this," she said. "You kept 3 years of invoices in a box in your study." "I just read them."
"Clara, we did this," she said again, firmly.
He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. "We did this." That evening at supper, Nate told the children. He didn't tell them everything, not the detail, not the full scope of Hargrove's overcharging, not the threat to the east pasture. He told them what they needed to know, that there had been a business problem with the ranch's accounts, and that it had been resolved, and that the ranch was secure. Thomas immediately asked if they were going to have to sell horses. "No," Nate said. "Are we going to lose any land?" Daniel asked. "No," Nate said. "Is it because of Clara?" Sam asked. The table went slightly still. Nate looked at Sam. "Partly," he said. Sam turned to Clara with the expression of someone whose theory has been confirmed. "I knew it," he said. "I told Ethan last week that Clara was going to fix it." "Whatever it was. You didn't know what it was last week," Clara said. "I knew you were working on something," Sam said, entirely unconcerned by this distinction. "You had your numbers face on." "My numbers face," she said. "You get a face when you're working on numbers," Sam said. "It's a very serious face. Ethan draws it better than I can describe it." Everyone looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the table. "I may have done a sketch," he said, to his plate. He looked up. "Can I see it?" she said. He reached into his jacket. He had apparently brought the sketchbook to supper, which said something about how the evening had been expected to go, and produced it, and opened it to a page and slid it across the table. She looked at it. It was her, at the kitchen table, at night, the lamp burning low, papers spread around her, one hand holding a pen, and the other pressed flat on the ledger. Her head was bent, and her shoulders were focused, and the expression on her face was, she didn't have a word for it immediately. Purposeful, yes. Concentrated, yes. But also something else. Something that looked, she thought, like someone who had found exactly the thing they were meant to be doing. She looked at it for a long time. "You're very talented," she said. "It's just observation," he said. "Observation is the whole thing," she said. "Don't minimize it." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his face that was not guarded or careful or controlled. Just a boy who had been told that what he did was worth doing. Just that, just the simple relief of it. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you," she said, and meant it differently. After supper, Mabel came to stand beside her at the sink. "He's going to ask you to marry him," Mabel said. Clara went very still. "Pa," Mabel said, "he's going to ask you. I know him. I've watched him for 16 years. There's a way he looks at things he's decided about. He has that look." Clara kept her hands in the wash water. "Mabel, I'm not telling you to warn you off," Mabel said. Quickly, firmly. "I'm telling you because I want you to know that." She stopped. Her voice had gone slightly rough at the edges, which was the only external sign she ever permitted herself. "I want you to know that I think you should say yes. If he asks, I think you should say yes." Clara turned to look at her. Mabel was looking at the window. Her jaw was set and her hands were still, and she had the expression of someone who has just done something that cost her considerably. "He's been alone too long," Mabel said, and we stopped. "I have tried very hard to be what we needed. I know I'm not always easy. I know I made it hard for you at the beginning. I know I was." "You were protecting your family," Clara said. "I was protecting myself," Mabel said very quietly. From another person leaving. The kitchen was completely still. "I'm not leaving," Clara said. "I know that now," Mabel said. "That's why I'm saying this." She finally turned to look at Clara, a direct, unguarded look, the most unguarded Clara had ever seen from her. You are what you did for Sam, what you did for this ranch, what you did for my father. You are exactly what we needed. And I was too afraid to admit it for too long. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. She controlled it immediately, so I'm admitting it now. Clara crossed the kitchen and put her arms around the girl. Mabel went rigid for approximately 1 second, the instinctive resistance of someone who has not been held in a long time and has forgotten how, and then she wasn't rigid anymore. She held on. Clara held on back. They stood like that in the kitchen for a long moment, and neither of them said anything, because there wasn't anything left to say that the holding didn't already cover. When Mabel pulled back, her eyes were dry. She would not, Clara thought, cry easily, perhaps not often, perhaps not in front of people. That was simply who she was, and Clara respected it entirely. You need to finish the dishes, Mabel said with perfect composure. Yes, Clara said. I'm going to check on Sam, all right. Mabel went. Clara turned back to the sink. She heard, in the other room, Mabel's voice and then Sam's voice, high and clear, saying something emphatic, and then the sound of both of them, something almost like laughter, not quite, but close. She closed her eyes for just a moment. A family does not become smaller when another person loves it, she thought. It becomes larger. She had not said that yet, but she was beginning to feel the truth of it in every room of this house, at every meal, in every small unremarkable moment that was actually not unremarkable at all. It was 2 weeks after the Hargrove letter that Nate asked her to walk with him. Not to the barn, not to the fields. He'd done both of those things before, for practical reasons. This was different. He appeared at the back door after supper while she was still in the kitchen and said, without particular preamble, "Will you walk with me?" She dried her hands. Yes, she said. They walked out past the garden, past her herbs, which had taken beautifully, the rosemary and thyme already looking established, and past the barn and the fence line, and into the open land beyond the yard where the evening sky was enormous, and the air had the particular quality of September air in Montana, which is cool and clear and smells of things ending, and things beginning in equal measure. They walked without talking for a while. Then Nate stopped. She stopped beside him. He looked at the land, his land, the east pasture visible in the distance, secure now, the cattle moving slowly in the evening light. I need to say something, he said. All right, she said. I'm not a man who says things easily. He kept his eyes on the land. Eleanor always said I made her work for everything. Every conversation, every admission. She said it like it was a complaint, but I think he paused. I think she understood it, that I meant it more, maybe, because it cost more. Clara waited. You came here, he said, because you needed a place. I put an advertisement in a paper because I needed help. That's how it facts. He paused. But somewhere between the beginning and right now, the facts changed. And I have not been saying what they changed into, because I'm not a man who says things easily. But Mabel told me yesterday very directly, because she's her mother's daughter in that way, that I was being a fool about it. Clara kept her expression entirely calm, though inside something had gone very warm and very still at the same time. She said that? Those exact words, Nate said. She said, Pa, you're being a fool about it, and if you wait any longer, she's going to think you don't have the courage to say it, and she deserves better than a man without the courage to say it. She's 17 next month, Clara said. I know, he said. She's terrifying. She's remarkable, Clara said. Yes, he said. He finally turned and looked at her. The evening light was full on his face, weathered and honest and entirely without pretense. Clara, I am asking whether you would consider whether you would be willing. He stopped. Took a breath. Tried again. Will you marry me? The open land was very quiet around them. Nate, she said. I know it's not. I know this isn't. I don't have poetry. I have a ranch that's been through difficulty, and 7 children who are loud and complicated, and one of whom has already informed me that he decided you were his the day you arrived. Which I think means I'm competing with a 6-year-old, for the privilege of asking. Yes, she said. He stopped. Yes, she said again. Simply, without qualification. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way you look at someone when you're trying to determine if what you just heard is what you think you heard. "You're certain," he said. "I'm certain of the numbers," she said. "And I'm certain of this." Something broke open in his face, not dramatically, not with any performance, just quietly, the way a window opens to let air in that's been needed for a long time. He reached out and took her hand, his large, work-ruined hand around hers, and this time he didn't let go. "I'm going to try," he said, "to say things more. I'm not going to be good at it. But I'm going to try." "I know," she said, "and I'm going to keep telling you the true thing, even when it's hard. I'm not going to be easy about that." "I know," he said. They stood in the September evening, holding hands in the middle of everything that had led to this moment, the advertisement, and the train, and 2 worn bags, and Sam's fever, and Hargrove's greed, and Mabel's walls coming down, and Ethan's sketches, and Luke's engineering book, and the herb garden, and the kitchen that had slowly become a hearth again, all of it. Underneath them, underneath this moment, the ground it stood on. "We should go back," he said. "The children will want supper." "They've had supper," she said. "They'll want to know what's happened," he said. "Sam already knows," she said. "He decided this 3 months ago." Nate looked at her. "He told me I was his," she said. His words. "Lord help us," Nate said, with something that was fully, finally, completely a smile. "Indeed," she said. They walked back to the house together, and the light was going golden across everything, and through the kitchen window she could see the lamp already lit, and the shapes of children moving around inside, and she thought that this exact thing, this ordinary beautiful thing, was what she had not let herself hope for, when she got on the train in Billings with 2 worn bags and nothing certain ahead. She thought about Robert. She thought about him honestly, without guilt, because she had learned that loving someone new did not require diminishing someone already loved, that grief and hope were not enemies, that you could carry the dead with tenderness and still walk forward into the living. She thought he would have liked Nate. She thought Eleanor might have liked her. She thought Sam would have liked both of them, because Sam liked everyone, immediately and without reservation, and the world was a significantly better place for it. Nate held the back door open for her. She stepped into the kitchen. 7 voices, all at different pitches, all speaking at once, the extraordinary noise of a living family rose around her. She was home. They told the children the next morning. Not at supper the night before, though Mabel had looked at both of them when they came back through the kitchen door and had said nothing. Which said everything. She had simply gone back to what she was doing, with the particular composure of someone whose theory has been confirmed, and who is not going to make a performance of being right about it. Sam had looked up from the table and studied their faces with the forensic attention he brought to most things, and then returned to his biscuit, satisfied. As though the matter had been settled in a court he alone presided over, and the verdict was exactly what he'd expected. It was the morning that Nate called them all together. He did it the way he did most things, simply, without ceremony, without building to it. He came into the kitchen where most of them were already gathered for breakfast, and he stood at the head of the table and waited until the noise that settled. Which took approximately 30 seconds, because his children had learned over 17 years that when Nate Holloway stood at the head of the table and waited, you settled. "Clara has agreed to marry me," he said, a beat of silence. Then Thomas said finally, "Daniel said James owes me $1. James said, from across the table, with the dignity appropriate to a 17-year-old who has just lost a bet, I said October. "It's still September," Daniel said. "It is September 30th, James said. "That's still September," Daniel said. "That's technically." "Boys," Nate said. They stopped. Sam slid off his chair, crossed the kitchen, and stood in front of Clara with his hands clasped behind his back and his brown eyes very serious. "I decided you were mine in June," he said. "I just want you to know I was first." "I know," she said. "I remember." He nodded, satisfied, and climbed back onto his chair. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at Clara across the table and said, "Good," with such quiet, complete finality that it landed heavier than anything the other boys had said. Luke immediately asked if this meant she would stay forever, and when she said yes, he said good, because I need someone to explain Chapter 7, and produced his engineering book from somewhere about his person. Which meant he had brought it to breakfast, which was not surprising. Mabel was last. She had been standing at the counter throughout this, not apart, not excluded, just slightly back, in the way of someone who needs a moment to make sure of themselves before they move. Clara looked at her across the kitchen. Mabel crossed to her and put her arms around her quickly, firmly, without the rigidity of the first time, without hesitation, and then stepped back, straightened her apron and said, "Breakfast is getting cold," and went back to the stove. Nate caught Clara's eye over the heads of his children. She thought she had never in her life seen a man look like that, like something that had been braced against for so long had finally been allowed to simply stand upright. She thought that expression was worth every mile of that train ride. The wedding was set for November, which gave them 6 weeks, and 6 weeks in a household with 7 children and a Montana autumn pressing in from all sides was not very long at all. Clara did not want anything large. She told Nate this directly, told him that what she wanted was the people in this house, Martha Greer and Helen Pruitt, Reverend Marsh performing the ceremony because, despite his wife's reservations, he was a decent man who had apologized to Nate quietly and sincerely for the intrusion into his household. That was enough, more than enough. Nate said, "Whatever you want." She said, "That's what I want." He said, "Then that's what it'll be." He said it with the ease of a man who has learned, over the course of several months, that the wisest thing he can generally do is agree with her, which she found both endearing and slightly amusing. The 6 weeks were full. Mabel, who had decided that if this was happening, it was going to be done properly, took charge of the domestic preparations with the organized efficiency that was her native language, and which Clara now recognized as love expressed in the only way Mabel had been allowed to practice for 3 years. She made lists. She consulted with Martha Greer, who arrived one Wednesday with fabric samples and strong opinions, and a laugh that filled the kitchen. Clara sat with Mabel over those lists more than once, and they worked together in the way they had learned to work, Clara offering, Mabel directing, both of them moving around each other's competence, without friction, without the territorial wariness of the early weeks. It was during one of those sessions that Mabel said, without looking up from her list, "I've been thinking about what you said." About studying. Clara kept her hands on the fabric she was folding. "Helen Pruitt came to see me," Mabel said, "the school teacher. She said there's a teaching certificate program in Billings." She paused. "She said I'm more than qualified to sit the entrance examination." "You are," Clara said. "It would mean leaving," Mabel said. "For stretches, not permanently, but leaving, yes," Clara said. "The boys aren't," Mabel stopped. Tried again. "They don't need me to run the house anymore." "They have you." She said it without any of the old weight in it. Just fact, they have you, and that. She paused. "That's a good thing, I know that now." "It is," Clara said. "And they will still need you. That doesn't change because I'm here." "A mother doesn't replace a sister." Mabel looked up. "You're not," she started. "I know I'm not your mother," Clara said quietly. "I'm not trying to be. Eleanor was your mother. She was remarkable by everything anyone has ever told me about her, and that is yours and your brother's, and it doesn't belong to me." She paused. "But I am going to be here, every day. And that's different from trying to be something I'm not." Mabel held her gaze for a long moment. "You should talk to your father about Billings," Clara said. "He'll say yes." "How do you know?" "Because he wants you to have more than this ranch," Clara said. "He always has. He just didn't know how to say it while he was trying to hold everything together by himself." Mabel looked at the list in her hands. "She wanted me to be a teacher," she said quietly. "Ma," she said, "I had the patience for it," said. She stopped. "She said I could make people feel like what they knew mattered." She was right, Clara said. Mabel folded the list. "I'll talk to him," she said. "Good," Clara said. She watched Mabel leave the kitchen and thought about Eleanor Holloway, thought about a woman she had never met who had seen exactly who her daughter was and named it correctly, and who had trusted, perhaps, that someone would be there to remind her daughter of it when the time came. She hoped Eleanor knew. She thought somehow that she might. The morning Ethan came to her was a Thursday, 2 weeks before the wedding, and she knew from the sound of his boots in the hallway, hesitant, stopping outside the kitchen twice before he came through, that whatever he was carrying had been carried a long time. She was alone in the kitchen. She did not look up immediately when he came in, which she had learned gave him time to decide how to begin. He sat at the table. She kept working. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes," she said, a pause. "Do you think she would have stopped? Do you think Ma would have minded, you being here? You and Pa." She set down what she was doing and sat across from him. She looked at him honestly, 14 years old, carrying something that was too heavy for 14, asking a question that deserved a real answer. "I didn't know your mother," she said, "so I can only tell you what I know of her from what everyone who loved her has told me." She paused. "And everything I've heard tells me she was a woman who loved her children and her husband with everything she had, and that what she wanted, above anything else, was for this family to be whole." She paused again. "I don't think a woman like that minds when the people she loved find a way to be whole." Ethan was quiet. "I still miss her," he said. Not with the careful control he usually kept, just plainly, the way you say a true thing when you've finally decided to say it. "I know," Clara said. "That doesn't go away. It changes shape over time, but it doesn't go away, and it shouldn't. Missing someone who deserved to be loved is not a problem to be solved." "James doesn't," Ethan said. "James talks about her like she's just a memory." Something finished. "James carries it differently," Clara said. "That doesn't mean he carries it less." Ethan looked at his hands. "Pa cried," he said, "the night Sam's fever broke. I saw him in the hallway. I don't think he knew I was there." "I know," Clara said. "He doesn't cry," Ethan said. "He never cries. He loved Sam's mother," Clara said. "He loves all of you. Men like your father, they feel everything. They just don't know what to do with it yet." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and put a drawing on the table between them. She looked at it. It was a drawing of the family, all of them, at the kitchen table. Not posed, not formal, just caught in the middle of a meal, Thomas and Daniel arguing, Luke with his book, Sam with his enormous serious eyes, James at the end, Mabel at the counter, Nate with his coffee cup, and Clara at the stove, with her back to all of them, but somehow present in every part of the drawing, the way the center of something is present, even when you're looking at the edges. It was the best thing he had ever drawn. She looked at it for a long time. "Can I keep this?" she said. "I made it for you," he said. She looked up. He had his mother's eyes, she thought, or rather, he had the eyes his mother had described when she told Nate that Ethan felt things more deeply than the others. The kind of eyes that see everything and record it and carry it, and that are sometimes a burden and sometimes a gift, and are always worth protecting. "Thank you," she said. "You fixed us," he said. It was very quiet. Very direct, entirely without decoration. "No," she said. "You were already trying to fix yourselves. I just showed up and helped." He almost smiled. "That's what fixing is," he said. She put the drawing on the shelf beside the clock, next to the drawing of Sam he had left there months ago, and it stayed there, and everyone who came into the kitchen saw it, and no one moved it, because some things find their place and stay. The wedding was on a Saturday in November, and the morning of it, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, the bed that would not be hers alone after today, and held Robert's photograph. She looked at his face for a long time. "I'm happy," she told him. "I want you to know that, not instead of missing you. Not because missing you has stopped, but alongside it. Both things at once." She paused. "You always said I was too practical to believe in grace. But I think that's what this is. I think somehow I ended up exactly where I was supposed to be, and I think you'd have liked it here." She set the photograph back on the shelf, beside the herb seeds she had never needed because she had already planted them, and she stood up and smoothed her dress and went downstairs. Sam was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs. He was wearing his good clothes and his collar, which he had put on without complaint, which told her how seriously he was taking the day. "You look very nice," he said, with the gravity of an official opinion. "Thank you," she said. "So do you." "I know," he said, entirely without vanity. "Clara? Yes, after today you're really ours," he said. "Not just staying, actually ours." She crouched down to his level. "Sam," she said, "I've been yours since the day you told me." He thought about this. "June," he said. "June," she confirmed. He took her hand and walked her to the door, which felt, she thought, like exactly the right way to begin. The ceremony was small, as she had wanted the family: Martha Greer and her husband, Helen Pruitt, Reverend Marsh, who had the grace to perform it with genuine warmth. The children stood in a line, and Clara was aware of all 7 of them the way you are aware of something that is the whole point of the room. Nate stood at the front, and when she came to stand beside him, he looked at her the way he had looked at her on the September evening when he asked directly, without flinching, with the full and serious attention of a man who means what he does. He took her hand. He said his vows the way he said everything that cost him something slowly, with the weight of someone who understands that words, when they're real, are permanent things. She said hers looking at him, and she meant every word with the particular depth of someone who has lost enough to know exactly what they are choosing, and chooses it anyway. When Reverend Marsh pronounced them married, Sam immediately said finally in a carrying whisper that made Martha Greer laugh out loud and made James cover his face and made Nate close his eyes briefly in the expression of a father who loves his child completely and is also, in this particular moment, mildly mortified. Clara laughed. It was a real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind of laugh she had not known she was missing until it was back. Nate looked at her. He was smiling. Fully, finally, without reserve, the smile of a man who has stopped bracing himself against happiness and decided to stand in it instead. He leaned down and kissed her, which was brief and warm and entirely his, and the children made various noises about it that she chose not to catalogue. Afterward, at the table, with more food than any of them could eat, and more noise than the kitchen had held in years, Clara looked around at the faces Thomas and Daniel already arguing again. Luke with the engineering book, open against a plate he hadn't finished. Ethan quiet and present. James at the end of the table, with the easy pride of an oldest child, watching his family be whole. Mabel moving between the table and the counter, with the fluency of someone who has finally put down something heavy and found her hands free. Sam in his good clothes and his serious collar sitting beside her like a small official ambassador of his own happiness. And Nate beside her, his hand finding hers under the table, and holding it, not performing anything for anyone, just holding on. Because she was there, and he was there, and they had both found their way to the same place, through entirely different roads, and the roads were behind them now. She thought about the train platform in Billings, 2 worn bags. A letter that said sufficient. She thought about everything that word had failed to contain. She pressed Nate's hand and he pressed back. The months that followed were not without difficulty. Nothing real ever is. There were hard winters and hard decisions, and the particular ongoing challenge of raising 7 people who were, all in their various ways, entirely their own persons with their own needs and their own complications. Thomas broke 3 fences and a window in the spring. Luke's engineering experiments required supervision of a dedicated nature. Daniel and Thomas reached an age where their disagreements required actual refereeing rather than simply presence. And the grief was still there, not gone, not buried, but changed. Eleanor was still in the house. She was in Mabel's hands and Ethan's eyes and Sam's questions, and the way Nate sometimes paused by the window in the evening for no visible reason. Clara did not try to move her out of the house. She had never tried. She had understood from the beginning that Eleanor was not a presence to be replaced. She was the ground the family had been built on, and you do not replace ground. You build on it. What Clara had done, what she continued to do, was add to the building. Mabel sat her entrance examination for the teaching certificate in February, and passed with a score that made Helen Pruitt write a letter specifically to compliment it. She told the family at supper, and Nate said, "Your mother would have," and stopped, and Mabel said, "I know, Pa," and that was enough for both of them. Ethan's sketchbook filled up. He started a second one. The drawing that hung beside the clock had been joined by others, a portrait of Nate that caught him exactly, the particular quality of his attention rendered in pencil lines that made Clara stop and look every time she passed it. Martha Greer saw it once and asked who had done it, and when Clara said Ethan, she said she wanted to introduce him in Billings, who taught formal drawing classes. And Ethan had gone the color of the kitchen wall, and said he'd think about it, which Clara knew meant yes. Sam grew. He grew the way children grow when they are well-fed and secure, and allowed to ask as many questions as they need steadily, confidently, with the easy expansion of something that has room. He started school properly in September, and came home every day with things to tell Clara about what he had learned and theories about the things he hadn't yet, and she listened to all of it with the attention it deserved, which was considerable. One evening, a year after she had arrived, she was in the kitchen when Nate came in from the fields and stopped. She turned. He had an expression she knew well by now, the expression of a man working toward something he needs to say. "What?" she said. "I want to tell you something," he said. "All right," she said. He came to the table and sat, and she sat across from him, and the kitchen was quiet around them, the way it had been that first morning, when he told her about Eleanor and the biscuits and the Fridays. The first real thing he had ever told her about the inside of himself. "When I wrote that advertisement," he said, "I wrote it because I thought what I needed was a capable woman who could cook and manage a household. I thought what was wrong with this place was practical. Something missing that could be supplied practically." He paused. "I was wrong about what was wrong." She waited. "What was wrong," he said, "was that we had all stopped believing it was going to get better. We were surviving, we were functional, but nobody believed it was going to be good again." He looked at her. "You walked in the door, and within it wasn't even weeks, Clara. Within days." Sam came back to himself. Ethan started drawing again. Mabel started breathing. He paused. "I started breathing." She held very still. "I didn't ask for that," he said. "I didn't know how to ask for that. I didn't know what to put in an advertisement that said, 'Send me someone who can make my family believe in tomorrow again.' I didn't even know that's what I needed." He looked at her with the full, direct attention that was his most intimate thing. "But that's what you did." The kitchen was very quiet. "Nate," she said. "I'm not finished," he said, which was unusual enough that she stopped. "I need you to know," he said, "that it wasn't just the children. And it wasn't just the ranch. It was me. You walked in and you looked at me, you saw me, the actual thing, not the thing I was trying to look like, and you told me the true things and you stayed anyway." He paused. Nobody had done that since Eleanor, and I had stopped thinking anyone would. She felt something move through her chest, warm and certain and old, the particular feeling of being known and not found wanting. "You are the best thing," he said. "That has happened to this family since the worst thing happened. And I want you to know that I know it, that I don't take a day of it for granted." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I know," she said. "I want to keep saying it," he said. "I'm going to try to keep saying it. I'm going to keep being bad at it, and keep trying anyway." "I know that too," she said. He turned her hand over in his. "Was it worth it? The train, all of it. Coming here with nothing to a house full of strangers, was it worth it?" She looked at him. She thought about the platform in Billings, and the cold window, and the 2 worn bags, and the letter that said sufficient. She thought about Sam at the bottom of the stairs on the morning of the wedding, collar on, serious as a judge, telling her she was theirs. She thought about Mabel's hands in the dark beside Sam's bed, working alongside her through a long and frightened night. She thought about Ethan's drawing on the shelf, and Robert's photograph on the other shelf, and the herb garden outside the window, and the east pasture still theirs, all 40 acres of it, and the kitchen that smelled like rosemary on Sunday mornings. She thought about all of it. Yes, she said, every mile of it. He brought her hand up and pressed it briefly to his face, eyes closed, just a moment, just that, and then set it down and held it on the table between them. Outside they could hear Sam's voice in the yard, explaining something at length, and with great authority to anyone within range, and Thomas responding with some objection, and Daniel taking Sam's side on purely contrarian principle, and Luke somewhere in the background, making a mechanical noise that suggested he was doing something with something he probably shouldn't be doing it with. The ordinary, impossible music of a living family. Nate looked toward the sound. "We should go out," he said. "In a minute," she said. He looked back at her. She was smiling, and he smiled back, and for a moment they were just two people sitting in a kitchen that had been a battlefield and was now a home. Holding hands across a table that had held grief and ledgers and pie dough and a 6-year-old certainty and all the arithmetic of survival. With the whole long rest of their lives still ahead of them and every reason in the world to believe it would be good. Because sometimes the person who arrives with nothing brings everything. And sometimes the family that believed it was broken discovers, in the presence of one steady and determined woman, that it was never broken at all, only waiting, with the particular patience of things that are built to last. For someone with the courage to walk through the door and stay.